Being on the outskirts, in a monastery where they lived remotely from people, she was tormented by unpleasant thoughts. No one paid any attention to her, who was in a bowed position before the holy statue. Winter came. The girl was cold. She tried to warm up. She mentally turned to God, noting that there were times when she hated him, but now she asked him to give her another chance. The girl admitted that she was truly naive, but now she realized that she was wrong. A violent attack of bloody coughing interrupted her prayer, and she raised her handkerchief to her lips. However, she looked up again and said that if God gave her another chance, she would not repeat the same stupid mistake again. But at that moment, an even stronger cough than before stopped her. She collapsed before the ancient statue, no longer able to stay on her knees. The girl understood that this was already the end, but in her last breath she whispered only one word. It was "I hate." Tears flowing from her closed eyes were accompanied by words about how she didn't want to die. However, the picture changed when the next day arrived. Opening her eyes, she saw the rays of the sun falling inside the bright room. She thought it was too noisy. She was used to the monastery always being quiet. As she slowly got out of bed, she wondered if she had lost consciousness and fallen asleep. But she felt that her breathing became easier. It seemed that she just needed a good night's sleep. However, here she was, struck by the reflection she saw in the mirror. Curses were on the tip of her tongue when she saw herself. In the reflection, a girl with clear skin and vibrant long hair looked back at her. Could she really have come back? This couldn't have happened, and this wasn't what she wanted. She picked up a large vase and threw it with all her might, screaming loudly that this was not what she wanted. The vase broke, water leaked out of it, but it was already impossible to fix anything. Bianca d'Arnaud, as she was called, was a countess from Sevran who had a rather unusual reputation in the country. She was considered an evil wife, and that was the opinion she had earned throughout her life, a previous life to which she did not want to return. Her husband was Count Zachary d'Arnaud, a loyal vassal of His Majesty the King of Sevran and the prince's right hand. Every day he risked his life on the battlefield, fighting for the reign of Prince Gautier. Meanwhile, his wife received new dresses and jewelry created by the famous artisans of Sevran. Spending a lot of money, which the Count did not have, she remained in her chambers. At the same time, she screamed like a madwoman, breaking fragile furniture. She was angry at the whole world and hated it with all her soul. She had her reasons for doing so, but it led to an unhappy ending. The maids passing by thought that several days had already passed since she stopped eating and did not call for cleaning her room. One of them thought that they should just come in since she didn't invite them. Suddenly something happened to her, and the other one was more abrupt. The beautiful blonde declared that it was even better this way, and that no one in the family did not know how much suffering Madame Bianca had brought to the Count. The previous Lord Arnaud was an extremely fickle character, causing the inhabitants of these lands to suffer immensely, but after Count Zachary became the new lord, everything improved significantly. However, the maid, who assumed that her mistress needed help, was struck by the harsh words of her interlocutor. Count Zachary was a modest and idealistic gentleman for Arnaud. He made a lot of money from the war, and everyone thought he was going to make their lands rich. The people loved and respected their ruler, but there was one nuance. His wife, who lived in luxury and was accustomed to her husband giving her money without any restraint. They were together for about 9 years, and because Madame was so abusive to the Count, it was rumored that they never shared a bed. This woman evoked only negative emotions in everyone. It seemed that things would be much better without her. Besides, the battlefield is a place where no one knows what will happen next. Someone may lose their head in battle, someone may experience death. No one could guarantee the return of their ruler safe and sound. His death could happen at any moment, and then his wife could lead to the decline of these lands. The maid continued and said that their master had no heirs yet, and she wondered what Madame was thinking about. At that moment she was busy with other things, remembering how she created lace. She held it in her hands, remembering that it had become popular when she was about 30 years old. She needed to understand what period of her life she had returned to. It turns out that she is now under 30, but this was not an exact figure. At the monastery she was taught how to weave lace. Later it became very popular. It was definitely not a dream. Bianca swung the door open, startling the maids, and rushed to talk to one person. The girls were frightened by her sudden appearance. No one expected her sudden exit. They wondered to themselves if she had heard any of their conversation. She burst into the manager's office to clarify something. It was Vincent, the butler of the Arnaud family, with whom Bianca had previously been quite rude. She burst into the office, called him Winky, and asked how old she was now. He tried to correct her by saying that his name was Vincent, and then asked if she was 18 yet. Bianca wondered if she was only 18, just coming of age. Then she asked where the Count was now, and received the answer that he had gone to the front a couple of months ago. The butler thought that even if she was indifferent to the Count, it was impossible not to notice that he was absent because of the war. He wondered what she could possibly be thinking. Bianca asked him if he knew when the Count would return, and he replied that according to plans, it should happen in the winter. The thought occurred to her that it was during this period that something unpleasant was supposed to happen. Then she turned to him, called him Winky again, and said she needed something. After this, she declared that she hated to be cold, and that he should prepare for her the skin of a fox, a silver fox. The servant bowed to her and said that he would fulfill her request and that he would do it immediately. He was indignant to himself, since this fur was the most expensive. Bianca turned and headed back to her room. At this time, the butler recalled the words of his master. He said that he had to do whatever his wife wanted. At Blanchefort, she had been brought up in richer circumstances, and when she married him, she left all that behind, and he had to reward her. The master's decree was firm. Whatever she wished, Vincent must do it in the best possible way. Turning around, the Count added that since it was his duty as a husband, he would do everything to ensure that she did not need anything. Vincent thought that he probably didn't realize how luxurious she lived and how difficult it would be to maintain that level. At this time at the estate, Bianca was still thinking about her fate. If marriage was a business, then she would only benefit from marrying Count Arno in the future, and that seemed hopeless to her. At that moment, the skin she had requested was brought. A smile briefly appeared on her face as she remarked to Winky that thanks to him, she always got the best. The butler thought that if she was thanking him, she might learn his name, and then he reported that news had come from the front. The Count will not return in winter. He has already arrived in the country. He will return to the estate very soon. Bianca was a little stunned by what she heard and remained silent. After that, she grabbed the fox skin and turned around sharply. She remains in memory as an immature, frivolous, and angry wife, completely uninterested in her husband. Bianca walked out onto the balcony and looked over the railing. She knew she had to change something, otherwise she would suffer the same fate as last time. At the end of her life, she was called Saint Bianca, but this did not flatter her at all. She raised her hands up and, turning to the sky, expressed her thoughts. As she had promised God, she intended to live her second life properly. Looking irritably at the sky, she said that she would never repeat her mistakes. In a complete rage, she was determined not to go through that difficult path again. At this moment, the Count was already heading towards his estate. The entire detachment was finally returning home after a harsh battle. He was looking through his telescope when he heard one of the soldiers ask how he was feeling. He also asked how he felt returning to the country after such a long absence. The Count did not answer this, but noticed that his wife was screaming at the sky. His confidants asked for forgiveness and asked him again what he meant. He lowered the pipe and thought to himself that she seemed quite healthy. The Count returned to his land, where he was the ruler. By the banner of his troops in the castle, they noticed the approach of the column. One of the warriors said that the black wolf flag was visible straight ahead. This symbol meant that Count Arno had returned. Shouts were heard all around. Everyone began to say that the Count was back in the country. He rode on horseback ahead of his warriors, and shouts were heard all around. Everyone reported that the famous warrior, nicknamed the Furious, had finally returned, and they rejoiced. He received this nickname on the battlefield. His silver hair was always soaked with the blood of his enemies. His hair, like a battle-hardened sword, testified to his strength and courage. His distinctive hair color was associated with victory. For the enemy troops, they personified fear itself, and he himself inspired terror. He was always met by a butler who congratulated him on his return. He reported that the banquet hall had already been prepared in his honor, for which he received gratitude. The Count turned to his warriors and said that they had all come a long way and had worked hard, so let them eat and drink to their heart's content. The warriors who remained in the castle asked how the expedition went this time. They received the answer that the event was amazing and that they would definitely regret not going this time. Army Commander Arno Sovor noted that the enemies had managed to see the power of the great Sovor. He was inspired and pleased with himself and his achievements. Arno's second-in-command, Gaspar, was much more reserved. Commander Robert noticed that he was tired of talking and demanded that the third commander be calmed down. Busy with their squabbles, they didn't notice how an unexpected interlocutor came out into the street. Sovor said that Sir Robert survived because he cut the spear flying towards her. Robert regretted that it was to him that he owed his life. Gaspar, as always, was extremely silent and did not participate in the squabble. Sovor noted that he would boast of his exploits to Robert's wife, his son, and even his grandchildren. At that moment, he heard a cough behind him, turned around and saw the lady. He stumbled in surprise, after which he said that he was glad to see her. The lady nodded casually and asked where the Count was now. She was informed that he had already gone up to his room and was going to take a bath before the meal. She glanced casually in their direction again and didn't react in any way. After that, she turned around and left, making it clear that she understood. After she left, there was a deathly silence that was truly frightening. Sovor was the first to leave and said that during their last absence, the Countess had grown a lot. Back then she was very small, waist length. He then noted that, looking at the white fox's fur, it seemed that her desires only grew with age. The white fox is a very rare animal, and finding it requires effort. Robert stopped the commanders and stated that the Count's decision did not concern them. To this he was told that Robert had better watch his facial expression, because contempt was visible on it. Robert felt embarrassed for not being able to contain his emotions. Only Gaspar wondered why the Countess was looking for the Count. His question was quite justified, since the Countess came out to meet her husband for the first time. Later, she walked down the hallway and wondered how many years she had known her husband, 15 or 16. That day, she decided to discuss an important matter, and without hesitation went straight to the Count's room. Looking through the half-open door, she heard voices. She didn't want to spy, but she wasn't going to barge in either. At this point, the Count was changing his clothes, telling Vincent that he had decided to reorganize the estate upon his return. He then added that everything needed to be checked before going to bed, and that he had to prepare an expense report for the current year and a forecast for the next one. The butler promised to do everything in the best possible way. At that moment, Bianca couldn't take her eyes off the muscular Count. He felt the presence of someone nearby and, turning around, looked at the door. He was surprised to see his wife trying to hide her embarrassment. She immediately explained that the door was open and she was not trying to peek. The Count had already received clean clothes from the servants and asked not to pay special attention. After that, he asked why she was looking for him. He added that if she didn't have an urgent matter, she could contact Vincent as usual. Bianca was indignant and wondered if she could really want to see him only if there was an urgent reason. She immediately voiced this question out loud. Then she said that she heard about his return, and so she came to see him. Bianca added that she is his wife, and therefore considers it necessary to be there. Vincent looked at her with his stern and cold gaze. At this time, he was torn between the desire to escape and waiting for instructions from his master. Bianca thought he still had the same cold and scary look. Then she wondered why he was silent. Perhaps he was annoyed that she had come unannounced, and perhaps he should leave. However, I decided that this was not an option and that this issue needed to be resolved. She remembered that she had promised herself not to make mistakes again, and if she did not take any steps, her fate would be sealed. Therefore, she said that she needed to talk to her husband and asked to leave them alone. Vincent retreated, although he was internally surprised by this turn of events. He was too interested and remained standing outside the door. He couldn't understand what she needed to talk about with the Count. The gentleman himself asked his wife the same question. Then, leaning against the windowsill, he asked what was the matter. Bianca thought for a moment and then said she had one suggestion. She decided that since they had been married for 9 years and she was already 18, she wanted to fulfill her marital duty. Bianca was angry, not understanding why she had to speak out loud. In a fit of anger, she stamped her foot to cheer herself up a little and make her proposal. The Count responded to this unexpected behavior with a surprised look. Bianca loudly and firmly declared that it was about an heir, and she was ready to give him life. He was silent. She told him directly that she wanted a child from him. There was a time when the life of any noble lady depended on marriage. Initially, her father or the eldest man in the family took care of her. But this could not continue forever, and sooner or later she had to leave her parents' home. Then the husband and his family took responsibility for her. In the past, the life of a noble lady without a father, brothers, or her husband's family, and without an heir, was worth nothing. Bianca, who had not yet given birth to a child, was facing a dangerous fate. So she collected her thoughts and continued the conversation, repeating her proposal. She looked at the Count, expecting him to respond somehow, but he simply remained thoughtfully silent without uttering a word. Finally, he said that he would be honest. He was in doubt and did not know exactly what to do. He simply asked if she knew what to do to get pregnant. Bianca knew this, but she felt that he treated her like a child. She knew this, and not from other people's conversations, but from personal experience. She was only 18 now, but her mind was older than the Count's own. She also remembered events from her past life. They were already sharing a bed when she was 20 years old. She had been through a lot and couldn't understand how anyone could forget it all. Count Bianca told him that she knew all this well because she had heard it from the maids. After that, fearing that her resolve might fade, she declared that it was her duty as the heir of the Arno family, and she must fulfill it. At her age, she should have at least known this. The tension between them grew, although all the emotions came from Bianca. The Count's face only darkened and asked what she could do in this case. He stepped towards her and asked if she could do this to him, based on what she knew. And what exactly does she know, and by what method, which is known to her, she can achieve this? He came close to her and asked if she could conceive a child in this way. Bianca was taken aback by his reaction, which was different from what she expected. Turning away, she thought he looked angry, though she didn't expect him to be happy. When he was so close, she became scared. He was a very strong man, exuding an insane masculinity. Sensing her thoughts, he asked if she was afraid of him. Bianca looked at him with confusion, although she didn't think her face revealed anything. Without waiting for her answer, he said that she should go back to her place and rest, and that he also needed to take care of himself. Bianca was outraged and demanded to wait a second. However, he had already grabbed the door handle and decided that they would talk later. Bianca knew this battle was lost and was shocked by it. If he doesn't have a child, everything will end as before. She will have to live again the life that led to her death. Inside, she screamed, "No, no, no," but it didn't solve anything. She remembered how she embroidered with icy fingers in the monastery, being completely poor and unhappy, and she decided that she would never allow this to happen, and grabbed his hand. He turned sharply to face her, but she knew he wouldn't give in. She asked him point blank how much he got for this marriage. Men receive a considerable dowry for their wives. However, the Count apparently was not ready for such a question and let go of her hand. Bianca thought he wouldn't answer, but she heard him start listing. 400 calves, 900 pigs, 100 silver cups, 300 pieces of silk, 2 chests of jewels and a piece of land. Altogether, this amounted to 2 annual budgets of the Arno estate. A dowry is money that a bride brings to the groom's house in honor of her wedding, which can be seen as an inheritance given in advance by the bride's family for her support. Often the amount is so huge that it is impossible to remember it exactly, but he listed it all without difficulty. Sometimes it is necessary to remember the exact amount. For example, when the groom gets divorced and marries another woman, he must return the bride's entire dowry to her family. Looking at the Count, she thought that the rumors were true. He really did have a mistress. So she said that she was not going to get divorced, and he could continue his relationship with that girl. After a menacing look in her direction, she continued and said that he could even register their child in her name. She would not interfere with their relationship, but would live on her substantial dowry. However, she didn't understand from the expression on his face, because in theory he should have felt ashamed. Any husband would be embarrassed if his wife started discussing his mistress with him, but his gaze remained menacing. He slowly said that he couldn't even imagine who had told her this nonsense. After that, he said that they would talk when the time came. Now he considered it absolutely useless. She tried to ask him why, but didn't have time. The Count turned and called Vincent, saying that he knew he was at the door and asked him to accompany Milady to her room. The servant was shocked, but he understood that he couldn't get out of it. Looking in the door, he said that he would immediately fulfill his request and asked permission to accompany her. After that, he turned around, and Bianca kept trying to stop him. She demanded that he listen to her, saying that it was very important. However, he had already closed the door, and the Count was left alone in his chambers. He covered his face with his hand, trying to digest this conversation. I remembered everything that was connected with my wife, how her nanny died of an infectious disease. The only person she was open with was the reason Bianca cried at night. She had completely lost her appetite, and he wanted to help her. However, as soon as she heard his steps, she told him not to come near her. Then she added that he should take off his armor before approaching her after returning from the battlefield. Looking ominously into his eyes, she declared that he smelled of blood. He clutched the fox fur in his hand, remembering the first time she had come to Arno and cried even when their gazes met. After returning from the battlefield, she avoided him, saying that he smelled of blood. and today she greeted him as if nothing had happened and even dared to take his hand. He thought that he probably still smelled bad because he hadn't had time to wash himself yet. Then he wondered what had changed during his absence. Bianca walked silently down the corridor. After that, they slept together only before he went to war, and they failed to produce an heir. Then, when she was 25, the Count went off to war for the last time. And the inevitable happened. The Count died on the battlefield. At that moment, she needed to have a baby as soon as possible, even if she had to take the first step herself. Bianca wondered if he loved this woman. Vincent followed her stubbornly, saying that he would take her there. She turned around abruptly and said that there was no need to follow her, she would get there herself. The lady again looked like her former Bianca. She was extremely angry, and as she walked past him, she almost pushed him. Bianca was determined to do what she had come back here for again. Vincent, accustomed to his mistress's harsh disposition, turned to look at her. Afterwards, he noticed that she was probably wearing fox fur. Night fell on the estate, and the stars began to play in the sky. Looking out the window, Bianca thought that in order to get pregnant, she absolutely had to sleep with the Count. But judging by everything, he is unlikely to be inclined to do so. Even if she herself approaches him, he will simply send her away. She had long since forgotten how tall and scary he was, and had he always been so muscular, even though she had seen him in the dark when he lay next to her. And then she didn't look at him. She thought to herself that with her undeveloped body, it would be difficult for her to seduce him, although it was unlikely to change in the future. In the past, the Count had shown only harshness, no tenderness, most likely because she, if he were a man, would have reacted the same way her body did not seem impressive to her. However, she was overcome by heavy thoughts, and she began to wonder what she was like, the Count's favorite. Is this really the daughter of serfs or an aristocrat? Whether he loved this woman, she was uncomfortable imagining another in his arms. She recalled how he had clearly listed her entire dowry. I wonder how long it took him to remember all this, and why he needed it. He must be prepared to give it all back when he decides to make his beloved the next Countess of Arno. The thought of bearing a child from someone whose heart belonged to another was repulsive to Bianca. The very idea made her feel sick. At that moment, she felt the gentle touch of fur behind her back. It was so pleasant that she even switched off from her thoughts. However, turning around, she saw the Count behind her. He said that he had tenderly wrapped her in fox fur and said that she had left her new coat with him. Bianca turned around and was not just surprised, she couldn't understand how he dared to enter her territory. The Count said that the fur looked good on her. After that, he stroked her shoulder. Bianca seemed to shrink back. She had not expected such tenderness from him. She looked up, trying to look into his face and catch his gaze. However, he only looked down and said that he was grateful for today. Then the Count simply turned around and left. Bianca was shocked. Did he really thank her, but for what? Suddenly, thoughts of fur came over her, and she suspected that he wanted to shame her or hint at big spending. Fur, fox. She realized that this had happened before. It was in her distant past. She remembered her nanny who had shouted at the Count, asking what it was, whether it was really squirrel skin. How could he bring squirrel fur when even mink fur would not be enough for her mistress? She declared that her miss was a cold-blooded woman and always preferred the best furs, after which she added that even if he was an earl, their county was as far away from him as the moon. She remarked that her master had acted unwisely and that her miss would not have married the Viscount's second son so as not to tie herself to such a wretched family. Nanny Ginny also noted that the Countess could have become a duchess. The Count did not react to these words in any way and stated that if she needed anything, they could ask Vincent. Her nanny, Madame Jeannie, did not hide her complaints against the Count and could make a scene in front of him personally. All this distanced her mistress from her husband. However, over time, the Count won many wars and created a rich country capable of satisfying any whims and caprices of his extravagant wife. Perhaps his words about the fur were only a hint, but she had never heard either sarcasm or gratitude from the Count before. He thanked her for meeting him for the first time after the war, and she could tell he was very surprised. She remembered that even while listening to her complaints, his expression remained indifferent and businesslike. Today he showed her his feelings for the first time, and she realized that if she communicated with him more, his thoughts about his successor might change. Then she would definitely pounce on him, Bianca thought, and even the Count, who was in the bathroom, seemed to hear these words. He had a strange feeling that someone was thinking about him. The next day, the castle rang with an unprecedented event. No one could believe that the Countess herself was looking for the Count to meet him. Even the children in this country knew that the Countess was ignoring him. However, rumors continued to spread, saying that she herself came down to meet him and immediately went to his office. The news carried by the servants spread very quickly. One of the servants stated that his wife was cleaning in front of the Count's room and saw everything with her own eyes. They even said that the lady left her fox fur to the Count, and then he returned it and threw the fur over her shoulders. Only one girl said, "Isn't it wonderful?" The maids, talking among themselves, said that the mistress would soon come of age and perhaps become pregnant. But even if that doesn't happen, they believe the relationship might still improve, one of the kind maids noted. However, the other one simply snorted and said that it wouldn't change anything. Then she remarked that the Count should really receive this gloomy woman. The other maids became frightened and tried to calm her down, fearing that someone would hear. She stated that this is true, no one thinks otherwise. The so-called gloomy woman is the one who does everything as she wishes. She noticed that the woman had locked herself in the room screaming and was picking on everyone. The servants noted that she was probably escalating the situation, as she really wanted to involve the Count in her games. One of the maids suggested that if she could, she would warm the Count's bed much better. Some thought it was too rude to the Count and Madame. However, the other one said that it was all true. She expressed the opinion that the lady had cold skin comparable to a cold heart. It probably looks like snake or frog skin. She herself resembles a reptile, she added, and suddenly saw that the lady was walking towards her with a furious expression on her face. The blonde girl did not expect her to appear at that moment. The lady's eyes shone like a snake's, and they contained the most savage rage and hatred. The mistress ordered her to clench her teeth tighter, then hit her so hard that she flew off. Her clenched fist showed how angry she was right now. After this, Bianca sat in a chair, deep in thought, and suddenly heard someone's voice. The girl asked why she was sitting there alone, then added that Zachary said that the Countess was ready to accept her and their child, and now she will live in the Arno castle. Zachary, Bianca wondered, why was she calling him by his first name? The girl laughed and told her not to worry, calling her sister she and Zachary would take care of the Arno family. So Bianca can act as usual. Nothing will change. She just needs to lock herself in her room and not come out. Looking at her, the girl said that they should take care of the heir of the family. But they're not going to give up on her. As usual, if she needs anything, you just have to ask. Bianca felt dizzy. She thought that only the Count could give her what she needed. She screamed it so loudly that she lost her voice. At that moment, it was as if the soap bubbles dispersed and light appeared. Bianca felt tears roll down her eyes. She opened her eyes, not understanding what just happened. The girl was lying in bed. She realized that it was a dream. But why did it seem so real? Did the fact that the Count showed her the door really traumatize her so much? She remembered that the Count rarely showed emotions, but that did not mean that he was incapable of having a mistress. Now she needed to cross paths with him more often and then think about the heir. Maybe I should take the bull by the horns and try to have a child. It seems awkward, but what else can I do? She simply had no other options. She walked out the door and headed towards the Count when she heard the dialogue from the dream. Shouldn't the Count receive this gloomy woman? She peered around the corner to see who was speaking. The words were repeated word for word, just like in her dream. Bianca heard that same maid say that she could definitely warm the Count's bed better than that cold reptile. Bianca was outraged. A gloomy and cold woman, you say? She is engaged in denigrating the family's reputation. The girl clenched her fist as if in a dream, remembering that she had often heard such statements when begging. At that moment, the maid heard her steps and turned around cheerfully. However, she saw an icy gaze, full of rage and anger. Bianca decided that she would not allow this now and slapped the maid with all her might. After that, she asked if she really thought she was skinny and plain. The voice was cold, like a reptile, like a frog or a snake. She asked the maid if she knew that reptiles spray poison. Perhaps that is why she dared to open her mouth and throw dirt at him. Bianca turned to the other maid and called out to her. She told her to bring the rod. After this, she stated that today her mood could not have been worse. It was as if a thunderstorm fog hung over her. Looking at this time, another maid brought her a rod. She held them out with a trembling hand. Bianca said that she could have just laughed, but how dare she compare her mistress to herself, an ordinary servant. After that, she demanded that she stretch out her hands. The blonde's courage disappeared somewhere when she saw that her mistress was not joking. Her whole body trembled, and the imprint of the slap was still visible on her face. She stretched out her arms, still thinking that this was some kind of absurdity. However, the swing of the whip sobered her up. While hitting her, Bianca said that it was because she dared to compare herself, ignoble, with the mistress. The next blow she gave her was that it was because she listened to other people's gossip about her mistress. The next blow was for her inability to keep her mouth shut, another one for insulting and slandering her mistress. The servants became worried and someone asked for the butler, but Bianca continued and said that this blow was because she dared to desire her master. At that moment, someone grabbed her hand so hard that she couldn't resist. Bianca turned around ready to hit the man. However, he asked what she was doing. Not surprised, the lady asked who he was anyway. It so happened that absolutely everyone knew about the 3 honorary commanders of Zachary de Arnaud. Of the 3 of them, only Robert served him faithfully even before Lady Bianca arrived. No matter how indifferent she was to the Count, how could the Countess not even know his name, Robert thought. However, he still introduced himself and gave his name. Bianca thought that perhaps he was one of the 3 commanders. After this, she stated that she was disciplining the maids and that he should let go of her hand, but Robert said that she was overdoing it. He then declared that she was undoubtedly his mistress, but he could not silently watch this bullying. At that moment, the maid realized that she could get away with it. She was completely angry and wondered how this could have happened, since she was only telling the truth. However, Bianca said she could admit that she was extravagant and unpleasant, but she couldn't ignore the direct insults directed at her. The maid should not have been told that she was a terrible and cold wife, and that she could sleep with her husband instead of her. Such words cannot be forgiven to anyone. The maid realized that it would be difficult for her to avoid punishment here. At this moment, another participant in the situation appeared, who asked what all the fuss was about in his thunderous voice. The Count himself appeared in the corridor. Everyone turned to him, not expecting his appearance. Bianca and the blonde thought, "Thank God, the Count will definitely help her." It was true. The Count was a magnanimous gentleman. Once a man who stole half a sack of wheat was released on his word of honor that he would return the whole sack the following year. The usual punishment for stealing property is to have a hand chopped off. Bianca raised her menacing gaze to her husband, ready to fight back, but she was thinking about something else. It was she, the woman he was hiding. The Count answered her with a calm look. Looking at her hand clutching the rod, he did not think about the fact that she had a weapon. He looked down before speaking to her. After this, he addressed her by name and asked if her hand was okay. This question caused confusion among everyone around. She was so angry that she still didn't notice what was happening to her. The whole moment remained unclear and confusing for her. However, her entire palm was cut by the rods. She clenched her hands tightly, thinking that he would tear them away to protect his lover. The Count turned to Vincent and told him to call a doctor to treat his wife's hand. She sharply replied that it was not necessary, and that it would be better for him to take care of the sweet face of the girl whom the Count loved very much. Then she asked if it was true that she was his lover. Then she said that she punished her so that others would learn a lesson. She didn't think that she had gone too far today, but she would still back off. "After all, she is the one who can warm his bed better than Bianca," she said out loud. These words came like a bolt from the blue. Then Bianca turned around, handed the rods to Robert and headed back to her room, but she was determined to get rid of this girl as soon as possible. Vincent cried out, "What about the lady's treatment?" She replied that she didn't need it, as if it was important to anyone to know that she had beaten the maid. Then she added that it would be better to have a beautiful face treated. And she left, proud and alone. A moment later, there was a deathly silence, and the Count asked what had happened here. The maid, in tears, said that she had simply been diligently washing the floor. She didn't expect that the mistress could attack her. Then he asked what happened next. Looking into his menacing and stern eyes, she did not know what to answer. He asked why, if she was just cleaning, his wife decided that she was his mistress. Why her thoughts led to such a thought, he did not understand. The Count repeated the question as he did not hear an answer. Expecting mercy and more, the maid was in shock, not knowing what to say. She just sat and looked at him, her hands ready to grab him in gratitude, stopped halfway. Then the Count simply turned around and addressed the butler. He instructed him to do everything possible to prevent rumors from spreading. After that, he simply left, and the maid lowered her head. Vincent ordered her to get ready to go home immediately. She added that he was almost thrown out for eavesdropping, as rumors do not spread when they are kept silent. She did not possess this quality, and therefore was not suitable for work in this house. Then, turning away from her firmly, he asked her to return home. She suddenly realized the hopelessness of her situation, and turning to him, asked him to listen to her. Vincent no longer paid attention to her and switched to Commander Robert. He asked him what he was doing here. He replied that he saw the Countess slapping the maid's hands and tried to stop her, but having learned of the insult inflicted on his mistress, he realized that the reasons for anger were justified. The only thing that surprised him was that she decided to punish her personally. No one had noticed such a reaction before. She was not interested in life in the castle or outside it, and it was unexpected that she reacted like this. Previously, she just sat in her chambers and bought things. The actions of the lady today contradict her role, but she acted quite harshly. Vincent said that he was still sure that the lady had changed her attitude towards Arno. This surprised Robert greatly, but he noticed that all of today's behavior did not fit into the usual framework. Either they were about to undergo big changes, or he was imagining things, but the lady had really changed. At this time, Bianca was lying behind closed doors. She was going crazy from the pain that was tearing her apart. The arm felt like it was on fire and swollen. Looking at the ceiling, Bianca tried to stop the pain with the power of her thoughts. But nothing helped, and she began to think. Since her hands were so swollen, the maid probably didn't have hands at all, but loaves of bread. This thought made her feel a little better. She was not tormented by pangs of conscience. She imagined that the Count was now comforting that girl, kissing Bianca's hands, swollen from blows. He probably quietly whispers in her ear that one day he will throw her out of the castle and give her place. It was unbearably painful, even worse than physical pain. Turning away, she looked at the fox fur lying nearby. She opened her heart only to her nanny Ginny, who came with her from Blanchefort. After her death 5 years ago, not even a personal servant remained nearby. In Arno and the young lady there was no one who could give support, and this made her feel lonely. However, unexpectedly she found an ally. The maid who swept and washed the floors in her mistress's room. She could only watch from afar, because the lady was used to enduring pain and loneliness on her own. But at one moment everything changed. Lying on the bed, Bianca heard someone enter the room. She turned around to ask who was there, and one of the maids apologized. She came into the room with a basin of hot water and said that she had come to treat her wounds with a herbal decoction. This will help reduce the swelling and heat in your hands a little, even though it was just a folk remedy. If Bianca doesn't want to call a healer, then she should at least do that. The girl asked to trust her just once. She would make a compress and leave immediately. Not expecting help from anyone in this castle, Bianca thought about it, but the maid looked at her with understanding, so she decided to give it a try. She gently touched Bianca's hand with the damp cloth. Her eye almost twitched from the pain, and the maid said she would try to do it more gently. She sat, gently wiping her hands, and Bianca became thoughtful. The herbal infusion began to work and she felt better. Warmth and peace appeared in my soul. She recalled the advice of her nanny Ginny, who said that when she cried as a child, she did not show it. Many people wanted to help her get up, but she considered herself a very valuable person and could not be touched carelessly. She said that one day someone would come along who would understand her, and when that happens, she will need to take the initiative. To do this, it will be important to come to an agreement with this person. Remembering all this, Bianca realized that the situation was perfect. She asked the maid what her name was. She replied that her name was Yvonne. After that, Bianca said that the decoction helped a little and asked if it was possible to make the same decoction the next day. The maid felt from her voice that her mistress was afraid of refusal, but she still extended her hands and asked. It was very unexpected for her. She realized that her mistress was not as simple as she seemed. The girl happily replied that she would do it with pleasure. She said she was glad she could finally do something for her mistress. Bianca sat and wondered what she should do next. It turned out that the Count did not want to have children from her, since he had a beloved woman. Without an heir, one can only sympathize with her situation in Arno. She thought about what she should do and what she could expect in general. She had to do something to survive. At that moment, she heard the maid's cry. Bianca turned around and Yvonne apologized. She then pointed out that she had noticed something on the floor and couldn't resist picking up the embroidery Bianca was doing. The maid said that it was the first time she had seen such beautiful embroidery, like the wings of a goddess. Bianca was very surprised by this reaction. Then she smiled and understood. She has something important. Even without an heir, father and brother, she will be able to survive. Because she has a weapon that will become her strength. 10 years ago, radical changes took place in the Count's life. At that time, he was just a young knight who was pursued by some man. He called out to him, asking him to wait. Zachary turned around and heard that his legs were too long, so he walked too fast. His interlocutor asked him if he was the son of Viscount Vigue. To this he replied that 3 years ago this title had passed to his elder brother and that he was currently the head of the Arnaud estate. The man was convinced that it was indeed his son and introduced himself as Gustave de Blanchefort. He said he was very pleased to meet Baron Zachary de Arnaud. The young man still looked at his interlocutor with distrust. However, he remembered that this count was the right hand of the Crown Prince Gautier and a loyal subject of Séverin. He served his king faithfully. Then he asked forgiveness for his rudeness and ignorance in not recognizing the count. He said that everything was fine because he himself started chasing him, and after that he asked him for a minute. He wanted to discuss something personally with the Baron. The conversation continued over tea. Count de Blanchefort treated him to a drink made from various herbs growing in the kingdom's garden. He added that, according to rumors, it is now fashionable in foreign countries to drink various herbal infusions. He noted that he enjoyed drinking tea in the company of a brave knight, but still did not begin the conversation. Everything was really interesting, but the knight was impatient to find out the essence of the meeting. He asked the count directly. He calmly replied that until that day he had been loyal to the king with all his heart. He had no doubt that the prince would one day become the rightful ruler of Séverin, even despite the presence of some political forces that support another candidate. The count is convinced that this man cannot possibly become a ruler. However, he had powerful forces on his side. There was a danger that a small group of people would support him, but it was too early to relax. Therefore, the count had a proposal to the knight. He asked if he would agree to become the sword of His Highness the First Prince. The Viscount's young son said he was grateful for the offer, but he was only a knight who had recently been made a baron. Does he have the right to defend His Majesty Prince Gautier? The count laughed and noted that he was too modest. He cannot be called a man without glory. Even then, tomorrow he was the Black Wolf of Séverin, the one who had been preparing for battle since the age of 16 and had received the title of Baron. It cannot be said that he lacks glory, and Blanchefort will always remain on the side of His Highness Prince Gautier. He couldn't just give up on this important issue. He then added that he would not hide the fact that he wished the young knight to share with him the service of His Highness Prince Gautier. Baron Arnaud heard that the bright future of the kingdom depended on him. The knight replied that if it was none other than the future king who was asking him, then how could he refuse? In the end, he was surprised by such a proposal. But he was ready to take the oath of allegiance. After this, he expressed hope for further support from Count Blanchefort, and the count replied that he would like him to take care of him too. He wanted to ask him one question, but it was more of a suggestion, and a rather strange proposal that left the Baron dumbfounded. It changed his whole future life. Count Blanchefort asked him if he would like to get married. The knight, taken aback, asked if it was really on the count. He laughed and said that he seemed to be free from prejudice, but he had a wife, so that would not work. But he has a lovely unmarried daughter. If the knight marries her, he will become not only an ally, but also a full-fledged member of the count's family. Then he will be able to support it with the help of his connections and fortune. The count noted that this would be beneficial to everyone. He expressed hope that the knight would not miss this opportunity. It was truly a profitable marriage, and it was hard to refuse the offer, especially for someone who had been thrown out of the Vigue family empty-handed. Count Blanchefort was rich, but the knight he was talking to was poor. The Viscount bestowed the title on his eldest son, and the younger one, thanks to marriage, will be able to gain fame and noble origin. In a sense, it could be compared to a profitable business deal. And of course, there was a dowry. 400 calves, 900 pigs, 100 silver dishes, 300 lengths of silk, 2 chests of jewels, and also a portion of land, which together was equal to Arnaud's budget for 2 years. When the count had read out all the proposals, he remarked that it would not be easy for Arnaud to treat the owner of such wealth as he should. His master said that he would have to try hard. After this, he ordered a letter to be sent to the place from where reinforcements had been requested last month. And if we look at marriage as a business, then in essence he sold himself to Blanchefort as a warhorse. However, due to the precious wife he received, the deal was not so simple. The count had to think a lot when he recalled her image. A wife who has never worked in her life. However, now he saw her in a completely different light. Her hands were swollen from the caning, and it seemed strange. That night, when the count threw out the maid, he hastily summoned his 3 commanders. Robert asked why there was such a rush. Gaspar suggested that perhaps Aragon had invaded again. Sauveur noticed that they had returned only yesterday, and it was already time to go to war again. They immediately approached the Count's office. Opening the door, Robert loudly asked why the Count had called them. However, they were surprised to see their boss. He said they arrived quickly, and Sovor immediately bombarded him with questions about the need to return to the war. They were very worried because they had not been home yet, but the Count said that he had gathered them because a more important question had arisen. Robert was amazed that there could be something more important than war. Gaspar's gaze also became tense. Sovor, as always, was thinking about his own things. He was surprised that the Count was wearing glasses, although they suited him. However, the Count said that he wanted them to guard his wife, not all of them, but one of them. The knights were astonished. They couldn't even find what to answer. However, Sovor exclaimed, "Is this really more important than discussing military issues?" Others wondered to themselves why the Countess, who was constantly sitting in the room, needed an escort. Robert noted that it was probably related to today's incident and asked if he was worried about a repeat. Sovor noted that, apparently, the Count was going to find someone who, if necessary, could cover up the consequences. And then he suggested that the purpose of this was to ensure that there was always someone who would immediately compensate for the damage. But Robert stopped him and told him to stop chatting. The Count, looking out the window, said that, judging by their words, the Countess spent most of her time in her rooms, but once the incident occurred, she just had to go out. He wanted to have a trusted person by her side at all times to keep an eye on her safety. He couldn't trust his wife's protection to just anyone. At that moment, the Countess was sitting in her room, embroidering. She recalled how she learned this. She did not know that at that moment the Count was telling his subjects that Bianca di Arno was the most precious thing in this castle. The next day the weather was wonderful. The sun was already shining brightly through the windows when the maid headed towards her mistress. She brought the herbal infusion again. When she entered her room, she did not hear her mistress. Looking back, she realized that she was most likely still asleep. She looked rather tired and even irritated. Yvonne thought it was the sun shining in her face and closed the curtains. The lady remained in the room with only a small strip of light. Yvonne considered whether to wake her up and decided to watch her lessons first. She decided that it would be better for the lady to sleep and carefully began to treat the wounds. The maid touched her as gently as she could so as not to disturb her. Yvonne had a younger sister, the same age as her mistress. She married a carpenter who was much older than her, so they didn't see each other often. And every time she thought about the lonely lady within the walls of the huge castle, she remembered her little sister. At that moment, she felt like she was next to her. Then Yvonne felt the lady squeeze the fabric. The maid immediately calmed her down and apologized for waking her. Bianca replied that everything was fine, it was time to get up anyway. Thanks to Yvonne, she at least woke up not too late, and then asked if she could help her change. Yvonne was surprised and asked if she really wanted to leave the room. The lady smiled and said that she had a lot of things planned for today. Yvonne followed her mistress down the corridor, not understanding what she was planning. Bianca said it was still a little chilly. The maid cried out that she had forgotten to take the fox fur. She said that she would quickly go get him and come back. Looking at her, Bianca thought that she was quite a smart girl, intelligent and caring. If they had met in a past life, they probably would have recognized each other earlier. Then, perhaps, Bianca would not have had to go through that difficult path. Although here, she wondered if anything would change in the end. She decided it was time to get down to business and stop dwelling on her memories. She has little time to live her new life. There was no point in wasting time regretting the past. Vincent, as always, was busy with the estate's affairs in the morning. When he heard the lady's request, he was simply amazed. She noticed that he had been taking care of the finances of the Arno household for a long time, long before his wedding with the Count. He confirmed that this was indeed the case, and she remarked that this was something that the Countess should be doing exclusively, but that she was too young to do so. She was now 18 years old and old enough to look after the household expenses. She wondered who else could teach her about housekeeping, if not Vincent, so she asked him to teach her. Vincent was surprised because it was the first time she had said his name correctly, and it warmed his heart. He thought that after buying the white fox fur, she had changed somehow. Previously, nothing like this happened after such purchases. She always spent large sums of money on very luxurious things, but now her expenses have noticeably decreased. Yesterday's incident with the maid who allowed herself to say too much was rather strange. She tried to establish discipline directly, rather than remain a bystander as before. Her desire to manage the family's affairs independently was quite mature and reasonable, and not a stupid whim. Vincent put his hand on his heart and said that she could trust him. He would definitely help. After that, he said that it was better for her to learn by doing. He suggested that they walk around the area right now and tell her everything. Bianca really liked this inspiration. She even felt a little pleased. She thought that it was not easy to get pregnant from the Count. This had already been tested in a past life. Therefore, it is worth starting to do what she did not do in her past life. Then she will be able to get closer to the Count by running the Arno family's household. To do this, you need to find the right people to do things right. Then the Count will understand that she is no longer that helpless child who can't do anything. He will be able to see in her a future political partner. This will help change her life for the better. Here, Vincent told Bianca that he would like to talk to her about her security. Bianca asked what it was about. He said that one of them would accompany her everywhere. She had already met Commander Robert. Commander Gaspar is a slightly withdrawn person, and the other commander was a citizen who had been freed from serfdom, as far as Bianca knew. After this, Vincent asked who the lady would choose. Bianca thought with displeasure that she still had to choose. She understood that they were talking about the Count's loyal commanders. It was obvious they didn't really want to do this, so Bianca said she didn't need security since Vincent was always somewhere nearby. She didn't want to make any extra noise while walking with her retinue. However, she noted that this looked disrespectful. Then she was informed that this was the master's order. At that moment, Bianca felt that her assumption of becoming the Count's confidant was a little foolish. It was as if the contract they had made was being torn apart before her eyes. Even in matters of choosing an escort, he suggested trusted persons. Even in this, she could not make independent decisions. And the escort was a good excuse for the bodyguards to appear. Suddenly, she felt as if she was surrounded by chains. It was as if she had become a prisoner in the house where she lived. And this made her feel uncomfortable. She felt humiliated. After all, the Count would have watched her under the pretext of accompanying her. Therefore, he would always know what the Countess was doing, no matter what she was doing. Can we consider that the Count and Countess are equal as spouses? She didn't know that at that moment he was watching her from the window. Bianca felt like she was taking part in a play where Vincent was the lead. It was as if he was saying that the main moment was now being decided which of the three the lady would choose. But she was still thinking and could not figure out how to decide. But in the end, she pulled herself together, considering it fair that she should ask her husband's permission. So it was better to think positively. She managed to find some peace of mind and think about the situation. There will be Sovor, one of the Count's freed commoners. It was clear from his appearance that he was not particularly sensible, and it looked like he would definitely be stupid. It was definitely not worth taking. Her life was changing for the second time, and this was the first time she had faced such a difficult choice. They all have their flaws, and someone had to be chosen. She started to speak when suddenly she faltered, deciding who would be the escort. At that moment, she felt a light touch from behind, which reminded her of something. And I couldn't believe that this was happening again. Could it be that the Count had decided to wrap her in a fox skin again? However, turning around, she saw her maid Yvonne, who apologized for taking so long to look for her. She was sorry that she had lost so much time and that her mistress was frozen. Bianca thanked Yvonne for running for her. The maid noted that she was quite strong and capable of a lot. At this moment, the commanders were somewhat stunned. Could this lovely maid really be so close to the Countess, since Bianca knew her? At the same time, Robert thought that she couldn't remember his name yesterday. Yvonne glanced back at the commanders with a slight smile. She was very positive, and the situation was immediately diffused. Despite the anticipation of a decision, the commanders could not hide their surprise at the lady's behavior. Bianca herself was glad that the air seemed to clear with her appearance. However, she thought she couldn't choose. She looked at the commanders with displeasure and wondered why no one wanted to put forward their own candidacy. At that moment, she suddenly heard the voice that I said, Yvonne, and she looked at the commanders in surprise. Gaspar raised his hand and announced that he would become her guard. Bianca thought he was as big as the Count. His face was emotionless, but he volunteered to be her escort. She couldn't understand what was on his mind, which made her uneasy, and at that moment the other commanders thought he was joking. She thought to herself that at least there wouldn't be any unnecessary noise, and she told Vincent that she didn't care. This choice was already a long one. From today onwards, Gaspar will be the mistress's companion. Bianca said they had wasted too much time and should start with the bedrooms. However, Bianca turned towards the voice. It was the Count. She was surprised by his appearance. Lately, they had started to cross paths too often, although before he had shown no interest in her. He looked at her silently, and her nerves gave way. She asked sharply why he was looking at her like that. The Count asked permission to touch her face. Bianca didn't expect such a romantic situation with so many people. She even recoiled slightly when he extended his hand. However, even this would have been a cause for shock for others. The Count and Countess had never been seen together. Then he gently touched the back of his hand to Bianca's cheek. She didn't understand what was about to happen and couldn't move. Her husband simply said that she had a fever. The maid was amazed. Bianca grabbed her cheeks. Yvonne immediately touched her mistress and said that it was probably because of being outside for so long without a coat. At this time, the commanders noticed that the Count's office was located directly above them. They wondered if he had been watching them all this time. However, he paid no attention to them and wrapped Bianca in his overcoat. After that, he said that it would be better for her to return to her room today. He indicated to the others that he needed to talk to his wife, and he himself would take her out so that they could return to their business. Taking her by the shoulder, he walked with her into the room. Bianca was amazed. Did he really want to talk to her about something? But from the outside, it looked very romantic. The tall Count was leading his fragile wife into the house. Everyone present was simply amazed, because he had never accompanied her before. It was warm inside. Bianca began to warm up. The Count walked ahead. She moved away a little, afraid to meet his gaze. She thought to herself that he most likely wanted to discuss yesterday's incident. He might even force her to apologize to that maid. Bianca had already forgotten what she looked like. It was clear that she was a blonde. And since he wants to take her as a second wife, then in her opinion, they should get along with each other. This is the Casanova of the millennium. After this, Bianca asked under what pretext he would have offered to accompany her if she had not had a fever. The Count turned slightly, noticing that her tone was irritated. Bianca noted that if he wanted her to apologize to that maid, he would not force her because she had pride. After that, she added that she was not sure whether she was in love with him, but the Countess here was still Bianca. The Count calmly and in a dispassionate tone noted that he had already thrown out that servant. Bianca was surprised and asked him again. Then she said, "Is this really how he wants to remove all suspicion from himself?" He just looked at her and answered very simply that he did not have a mistress. Bianca was confused, not so much by the words, but by the tone of the words spoken. She said in a slightly hurt voice that now he seemed to want to avoid the topic entirely because, in her opinion, she was just a child in his eyes. The Count did not answer, but the next second he did something unexpected. He raised his hand and touched her. Then he said he didn't know how corrupted he was in her eyes. And he added that he was not so shameless as to have a mistress without his wife's knowledge. Bianca couldn't figure out if it was related to the temperature, or maybe with the fact that he closed her eyes, but she could clearly hear his heartbeat. The heat carried her away into some strange memories. It seemed like she should remember this feeling. She could smell a familiar scent coming from the Count's hand. Something was awakening her memories. When he touched her, she remembered him from his past life. In moments when they were close, it was the scent of musk. She came to her senses when the Count removed her hand from her eyes. Bianca immediately thought she was going crazy and wondered what she was thinking about. But she still asked. It turns out that this girl was not his lover. Receiving no answer, she said that since he was so reluctant to bring up the subject, she would not ask anymore and would pretend that she did not exist. The Count thought she was stubborn and said it out loud, to which she only snorted. She said that if they had or were planning to have a child, there would be no doubt about it. She also expressed her opinion about what people would think if they learned that she did not have a child by the age of 18, but the Count immediately replied that it was still too early for a successor. But Bianca was in the mood for an argument and asked why he had assigned her an escort and chosen one from among those who had trouble looking after her constantly. He replied that it was simply to avoid cases like yesterday, to which Bianca replied that she now had a personal maid. The husband said that which of them would take better care, the maid or the knight. Now it all felt like a fight, and she remembered that he was called a fierce warrior, and it was really difficult to defeat him. He thinks she's stubborn. It's a different story. She said that she walks around his castle and nothing will happen to her. The Count lowered his eyes and wearily said her name. Then he said directly that the castle did not belong to him, but to both of them. Bianca couldn't believe she heard such words. She touched the ring on her finger, the wedding ring. I remembered that in my past life, the Count never spoke about them. Her husband noticed that her temperature was rising. He put his arm around her and said it was time to stop arguing. She needs to rest, otherwise she will get sick. Bianca thought he had ruined all her plans for the day and wondered if this conversation was just for the sake of arguing or if he really wanted to discuss something. However, these questions remained unanswered. Despite rest, her temperature continued to rise and she felt unwell for several days. She didn't know what could have caused her illness, and in her dreams she wondered how it all started. But life continued in the castle, and everything went on as usual. At that moment, the Count was reflecting on the past events. He was surprised that Gaspar volunteered to accompany Bianca. However, at a meeting with the commanders, he noted that those who remained needed to distribute his responsibilities among themselves. Robert took charge of the logistics, and Sovor took care of the stable work. At that moment, Vincent came up and noticed that he hadn't made mulled wine for a long time, and the lady could be offended by him and call him Winky. It should be noted that the name Vinky, translated from French, means mulled wine. Vincent noticed that she suddenly asked him to teach her how to run the house. Her intentions were like drops of water on a lotus leaf. You never know where they will end up. The Count noticed that he said that she usually sits in her room and does not go anywhere. Vincent noted that this had been the case before. But in the last few days she has been coming out more often and has done a lot of mischief. It was not only about the maid, but also about the choice of an escort. He asked what the Count had spoken about with the lady. At that moment, everyone tensed up. This was interesting for both Robert and Gaspar, as well as Sovor, who was thinking that mulled wine was the best thing you could drink in the cold winter. The Count replied that Bianca thought he had a woman on the side. Then he noticed that perhaps she was worried about being sent back to her father's house. Robert remembered what she had said, in a conversation with that maid, that it was not worth saying that Bianca was a terrible and cold wife. He realized that this was why she had been so angry with the maid yesterday. The Count asked Vincent if she had sent letters to her father. He received a reply that there was no mail. She did not send or receive letters. The Count was surprised that her father never wrote even a couple of lines to his daughter. He remembered how he reacted to the death of Nanny Ginny from an infectious disease 5 years ago. Then Zachary told him that Bianca was having a very hard time and that the woman was like a mother to her. However, Bianca's father replied that if the disease had struck Arno, it would have affected all of Sevran, and it was worth informing the prince of the need to send condolences to the affected areas. Thus the Count showed that he did not care about Bianca. Later, he turned to the butler, saying that if Bianca asked him to teach her something, he should do his best. He would like the butler to inform him of what exactly would interest her. "Let her learn to run a household and get used to it before spring," said the Count. He intends to take Bianca with him to the capital of Laos. At that moment, Robert choked on his mulled wine, although Gaspar managed to keep a straight face. Robert thought that the escort would last a long time, but he had expected no more than 3 months. Sovor decided that he wouldn't be a scapegoat for long. He already imagined what the path to Laos would be like. At that moment, a real theater was being played out in his thoughts. This was exactly how he imagined the journey with the Countess. He saw how she would groan indignantly, wondering how much longer she would have to travel in this carriage, and that she wanted to drink afternoon tea. He imagined her distracting Gaspar, demanding that it all be over already. He tried to calm the Countess and said that if they stopped now, they would have to set up camp in the forest. All the heroes in Sovor's head had his face. The Countess was arguing with her escort. Sovor thought that Gaspar was not at all able to adapt to others. Then he was struck by the thought of why the Count had decided to take his wife with him at all. It was obvious to him that she would sweep all the clothes off the shelves of fashion stores, although he himself would not have been against it. He had already forgotten that she got married at a very early age, but by the age of 18, 2 or 3 children appear in the family. Although they did not yet have a successor, Sovor thought that this was a terrible thought. He asked his master if the reason he wanted to take his wife with him was because they were going to have a child. The Count was surprised by this question, because recently he had begun to hear such demands more and more often. But Sovor did not calm down and waited for the Count's answer. He took off his glasses and thought. Bianca's words about wanting to have a child with him came back to him. However, the Count said that he did not want to touch on this topic now. That was not the point. Sovor thought that the Count could not be so angry about this. His face turned crimson, but he realized that he had to stop asking questions before he became furious. At this point, Robert noticed that he wanted to talk to the Countess about this. The Count was surprised at the direction the conversation had taken, after which he said that he simply wanted to leave. He noted that there was no point in talking about it now, since they weren't going anywhere yet. However, the commanders noted that the Countess might refuse to go. Everyone wondered why he was taking her consent for granted, whether the Count was really so self-confident. The Countess, who in her heart felt a slight distrust of the Count, soon recovered and began to learn how to run a household. From early morning they spent a lot of time together with Vincent. He waited for the prearranged hour and thought about what else he needed to tell her. When she finally showed up, she apologized for being late. Vincent greeted her, noting her strange appearance. She said that while she was getting ready to go out, she lost track of time. He thought she looked like a Matryoshka doll, then noticed that it was colder than usual today. Matryoshka didn't feel very well. She asked if there were too many clothes. The maid remarked that she couldn't believe how easily she had fallen ill back then, so it was better to be on the safe side. She didn't know that the illness could last for several days, and she would have immediately taken the fox fur coat. Finally, they went on about their business. Vincent said that most of the territory of Arno is plains, and the place where the castle is located is one of the highest points. To the east there was a forest, and nearby there was a river, which made it possible to develop both agriculture and forestry, and he was extremely pleased with this fact. For the Countess, who was absolutely not interested in this issue, the territory of Arno was the subject of only one conversation in her past life. This happened under very unfavorable circumstances. That's why Bianca remembered this conversation for a long time. It all happened after the Count died in the war. That day, Viscount Vigue, the Count's brother, drove Bianca out of Arno. Vincent said that if she went straight east, she would see a forest, and that she would have to follow the forest path for about 10 days to reach the Blanchefort family land. As she walked barefoot, she thought how fortunate it was that the ground was so level. When she wandered around, she hated this place with all her soul. Yvonne kept adjusting her mistress's clothes, especially now that they were illuminated by the sun. Beautiful fields and trees spread out around. Bianca couldn't resist and expressed her admiration for the beauty of nature. The maid was glad that her mistress liked her. After examining the surrounding area and explaining the situation of the territory, Vincent stopped at the sewing shop. He remembered that the lady had specifically asked about this, so I decided to show her everything in person and told her again about the production and embroidery of clothes from fabrics. She was accompanied by a maid and Gaspar, but Yvonne found it unpleasant to listen to people's voices. They were wondering if it was the Countess they had heard that she had beaten and fired Ante, who had worked for them in the castle. Then they added that there were rumors that the Countess was very thin and had a so-so face. Now the girls said that she was rather plump than thin. Her face was like a loaf of bread. They even noted that apparently skinny Anta had been hit hard. Yvonne wanted to defend her mistress, trying to say that she was simply wearing a lot of clothes today. She wondered if the lady had heard all this. However, she didn't pay attention and pointed her finger at the embroidery on the display case. She asked who completed it and in what time. The girl replied that she had been embroidering it for about 4 days. The Countess told her to find her tomorrow. She needed to talk to her. After that, she asked Vincent what was next on the agenda. Then she turned and walked forward quickly, with clenched fists. The girl was surrounded by her friends, and she was worried about what she could have done wrong. At that time, Bianca thought that this talented girl sewed quickly and could be easily trained. Vincent said that next up were a butcher shop and a candle shop. On the way they came across a butcher shop. Vincent said that here they salt meat, prepare it for winter storage and everything related to this. You can gain a lot of fat during the winter. However, Bianca was already distracted and wanted to go further to find out where the candle shop was. Vincent pointed her in the direction. She was delighted. She couldn't believe that the place where they were made was so close. She was told that candles were a rarity in the monastery and were distributed immediately. She wanted to see with her own eyes and remember how they were made. When we entered, we saw a worker at the vat. He described the candle-making process, where melted pork fat was lowered and raised many times, so the candle became thicker after each approach. The worker handed her a candle so she could try it. Bianca thought that this candle was very different from the one in her room and smelled very strong. Vincent explained that this was because the candles were made from different materials. The candles in the Countess's private chambers and dining rooms are made of the highest quality beeswax. Since this material can only be obtained in the spring, since bees only produce honey at this time, it is available in smaller quantities and therefore expensive. It is mainly used for royal and religious ceremonies because it is less odorous and leaves less soot. He said that the Count had ordered beeswax candles to be placed wherever she was going, and the Countess was furious again. Is he really going to continue to patronize her? Is he just making fun of her? Or is this a hint that she should try to be more economical? Bianca was about to leave, but she heard some noise. She listened carefully and headed in that direction. Just as she was about to approach, security intervened. Gaspar moved her aside to check what was going on. Lifting the lid of one of the boxes standing nearby, he was confronted with an unexpected picture. There was a boy sitting inside with a knife in his hands. Gaspar sternly asked who he was. The boy with the knife was clearly dangerous. The knight grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. At that moment, the owner named him Nicola. He shouted loudly at the boy and asked what he was doing there. Yvonne advised the lady to stand behind her. The boy had a knife in his hand and blood was dripping from it. He apologized, noting that the boy was simply holding a knife. Bianca said it would be difficult to seriously injure her with that knife and demanded that Gaspar leave it and Yvonne examine it. Indeed, this child could not have caused her any serious harm. However, it was not for nothing that he hid in this box. While the worker was talking, Bianca decided to look inside. What she saw filled her with utter admiration. She had never seen such beauty before. It was like the creation of angels. It was so beautiful. She saw one of the candles, which was skillfully carved. It was a magnificent form. Such beauty was impossible to imagine. At this time, Yvonne bandaged the boy's hand to stop it from bleeding. Bianca turned to him and assumed he had done it. He stated that he didn't mean any harm. However, he was frightened since everyone knew about the lady's formidable character. She turned to the workshop worker and asked if the boy had been trained to carve candles, to which he received a negative answer. The worker reported that the boy's father was a shepherd and his mother a servant. He was born into a poor family and would have become a cattle breeder early on, like his father. However, recently he learned to ruin candles. Vincent remarked to the lady that practice is often more useful than theory. Even the candle was Arnaud's property, and the boy used it for his own interests. It was no different from stealing. Therefore, he should receive a fitting punishment. Vincent insisted that she should scold him so that he would not think about it anymore. The Countess looked closely at the child. Tears were streaming from his eyes. There were many rumors about the lady, especially that she had beaten a maid in her castle a few days ago. He couldn't even imagine what it was like. She probably hit her and said it was because she didn't do what she asked. The boy was afraid that she would hit him too, and he began to tremble all over. However, the lady simply told him to find her tomorrow. It seemed to him that all the threats of the world were hidden in her eyes, and his life was over. But she turned around and said it was time to leave. Vincent hurried after her and noted that practice was very important. He needed to be punished. Bianca herself spent the entire day studying housekeeping. The next day was early morning. The sun had just risen. They looked at each other, not understanding what awaited them. They knew that the lady had called them both. They were met at the threshold. It was Yvonne, smiling as always, who invited them in and said that she would tell the lady. After this, she invited the boy to follow her. The boy didn't know how to address her and called her little sister. He then expressed his gratitude for dressing the wound, explaining that he had washed her handkerchief, but it was not dry yet, so he had not brought it. He promised to return it a little later, and Yvonne said that he should thank not her, but the lady, since it was she who asked him to help him, and the handkerchief also belonged to her. This was unexpected for Nicola. He expected anything but this. He couldn't believe his ears, but he was still too scared. Yvonne said that the lady had no place to put the handkerchief, so it was in her possession. She then noted that the lady was also glad that the boy's wound was healing. He didn't believe it and asked again. At that moment, a maid who had been eavesdropping passed by, and as she passed, she pushed Yvonne hard, causing her to fly back and fall to the floor. Before she could understand what was happening, she looked up and saw hatred in the maid's eyes. She muttered the word traitor through her teeth and walked past. Yvonne knew that Ante, who had recently been expelled from here, had many friends both inside and outside the castle. Rumors spread that it was the mistress who had driven her away, and they spread quickly. Because Yvonne was close to the lady, she began to be called a traitor. Thinking that Yvonne was watching everyone from the sidelines and telling everyone about her colleagues, she was considered a real traitor. Because of this, she had to constantly face hateful looks. At that moment, Nicola addressed her with an appeal, again calling her sister. He asked her if everything was okay, and she remarked that she needed to be more careful. Then she laughed and noted that she had a fairly strong build and was not hurt. After that, she smiled again and said that it was time to go because the lady was already waiting. They reached her chambers. Bianca said they arrived quite early, as she had simply asked them to find her. However, she praised them for their diligence, as they had come early in the morning. The seamstress was surprised, as was the baby, since the lady looked like a little rabbit yesterday. But they were met by a slender young girl who asked if they could keep their mouths shut. The seamstress said she was often called a wallflower. Bianca remarked that this was excellent, and added that no one should tell her about the design she was about to show her without her permission, and also promised to teach her how to weave such lace. And she had to do as much as she could in a week. Accepting the drawings, the seamstress readily agreed. Then she asked what kind of lace it was. However, the Countess had already turned to the boy and reminded him that he had been stealing Arno's candles and cutting out various things from them, saying that hands would be cut off for theft. Since he is still very young, she will have to give him another punishment. The boy's whole body was sweating. He was afraid that something worse would happen. However, the lady opened a pre-prepared box in front of him. Nicola was amazed. Inside were luxurious candles. The lady noted that, as she had expected, he immediately understood that these were first-class beeswax candles. His punishment was to cut out as much of these candles as he could and then show her the result. Then she added that she would tell the butler so that he could get new candles when these ran out. Looking at her, the boy said that this was not a punishment, and why was she giving him something so valuable? He thought she would drive him away from these lands, and this surprised Bianca. She just smiled and said that you could tell she was invested in them. Starting your own business requires a lot of money and time. Now she was investing in developing their talents because they can create truly beautiful things. Then she folded her hands, and the two felt a certain cheerful and daring mood in her behavior. Looking at them, she said that she planned to make a business out of it. She decided to become the best in the field of creating beautiful candles and lace. However, the butler did not appreciate her intentions and said that she was giving too expensive things to a child and an ordinary seamstress. However, Bianca said that looking at beautiful, expensive things improved her mood and ordered the yarn to be given to the seamstress. She then stated that more materials would be needed in the future and that he would need to get them, and then walked him out the door. Shocked by the mistress's behavior, the butler could not resist her. He thought that my lady's expenses were becoming as great as before, and the sums had again increased considerably. At this time, Yvonne began to have problems. A fire broke out in her room and her winter cape was destroyed. Yvonne tried to put out the fire with water, but it was too late. This was her only winter clothing, and she didn't know what to do now. At that moment, she heard a sarcastic voice that said that if she was going to take care of her own things, then she should take care of them. The maid told her colleague that Yvonne seemed unaware that such a thing could happen, and noted that since she had decided to sell out her colleagues, she should have acted a little more intelligently. After this, the girl decided to turn to a seamstress for help in restoring her clothes. However, she was shocked by her condition and said that she would not be able to mend the shirt. Yvonne pointed out that they would probably just have to throw it away, and the girl agreed. She said that she could not help in any way, since last time it was she who brought the rod and was the one who reported it to the butler. This caused her problems, although Yvonne, who treats Milady like her little sister, remains with her to this day, despite the bullying. After this, the girl suggested putting on her coat so as not to catch a cold, but Yvonne replied that it was okay, since she would have to work in the hallway all day, and she needed it more. She remained in a positive mood, and decided that she could cope with it. Yvonne stated that she was very strong and the cold could not break her. However, this was too self-confident. While walking, her mistress noticed that she had less and less clothes each time, and she said that she had accidentally burned her shirt. Gaspar suspected that this was not the problem, but Yvonne said that she felt fine, and even if she was cold now, she would not get sick. Bianca thought she didn't know about all the twists and turns between the maids. But then I remembered something. She hadn't worn a gray squirrel fur coat at all lately. It is still stored somewhere in the cabinets. The maid said that she already had a good fur coat. The mistress wore a marten fur coat, and she noticed that marten coats looked much more luxurious on her. The lady agreed that this was indeed the case, but from that moment on she would no longer wear a coat with squirrel fur. So Yvonne can take it. The maid was amazed, but the mistress noted that she had a new fur coat, and Yvonne could throw away that coat or do with it whatever she wanted. However, she would like to wear it if possible. Then she added that she wanted her maid to always be by her side and in the best shape. Yvonne was touched and wondered if the lady really cared about her. She loudly admired how kind her mistress was. However, Gaspar decided to cover her with his own cloak. When the squirrel coat arrived, Yvonne asked hesitantly what it looked like. The lady said it suited her very well, and Yvonne remarked that it was very warm and comfortable. Bianca nodded with satisfaction and said that since Yvonne was her maid and worked hard, she was glad that she could at least please her in this way. After that, she reminded them that they were expected and it was time to go. Yvonne couldn't stop thinking about the fact that her mistress had called her her maid, meaning that she was now her personal servant. She thought that this coat could be passed down from generation to generation, and at that moment Gaspar decided that it suited her very well. Bianca asked Vincent where they were going today, and he replied that it was to the cattle grazing area. The lady was surprised because it was winter now and they were still out grazing. The butler replied that they were preparing food for the sheep and cows for the winter, but the horses also graze in the winter. The fact is that the Count ordered that horses be bred so that they could withstand harsh winter conditions. Therefore, grazing is carried out during the winter period. Bianca thought that this meant that Arno's horses were very strong, and that was good news because even if she couldn't change the future, she could use them. However, then she pulled herself together and thought, what strange thoughts. She was again starting to imagine the worst-case scenarios. Even though she had promised herself that she would do everything to avoid being kicked out, the prospect still terrified her. She couldn't forget the past so easily, it still had a hold on her. At that moment, she was called and asked to look forward. Bianca was amazed by what she saw. Her gaze fell upon strong, robust, and beautiful horses. Despite the severe cold, they seemed to be feeling fine. The Count himself sat on a black stallion. Despite the frost, he was dressed very lightly, with only his shirt open, and this was surprising. Bianca remarked that as a Count, he should have dressed differently, given the cold. He looked very confident and impressive. The girl stopped and watched the Count for a long time. She couldn't take her eyes off him. He looked very powerful, riding on a strong horse. The meeting made a strong impression on her. It seemed to her that the Count looked free, and this was exactly what she had been missing all her life. Deep down, she was very envious of his freedom. After that, I remembered that he said that these possessions belonged to both of them. It's easy for him to say this because he has freedom, while she is still far from it. After some time, she will come to a different realization. She will understand that the envy she felt at that moment was in fact just a manifestation of an inferiority complex. This was after Gaspar began guarding the lady. Sovor looked after the stables. He did it in a rather funny way. At the end, then he congratulated them on the fact that they would be going swimming today. He told them that since the Count was grazing other horses instead of him, it was only to his advantage, since he did not want to go outside in such frost. After that, he kissed the little foal, calling himself Papa Sovor, wishing him to grow up big and healthy so that he could fight side by side with him. As always, Sovor's rich imagination led him into interesting depths. A whole movie played out in his head. He demanded that the little horse not scatter his loyalty left and right. His father had to be a thoroughbred, with good parents and origins. Because genealogy is as important to horses as it is to people, it was at that moment that he was called out. He didn't notice how the lady, her butler, and her retinue appeared in the room. Still not returning from the world of his fantasies, Sovor grinned slightly. However, when he realized that the Countess was in the stable, he almost fell. Bianca said she would pretend she hadn't seen anything and they could get on with the job. Sovor heard that she had been inspecting their land recently, but why did she have to come to the stables? The knight remembered how she behaved at the very beginning. When the lady arrived in Arno after the wedding, she was constantly dissatisfied, and this was evident in her appearance. She was crying, anger and irritation were on her face, so he didn't know how to behave. Now he expected a scolding from her, since he had not had time to properly clean the stables. At that moment, Yvonne licked the horse. She was shocked, as she was not at all prepared for this and was not used to such close contact with animals. She staggered and almost fell, but Gaspar came to her aid and caught her. Lately, he has been showing her signs of attention. Bianca turned around and asked if everything was okay, and the maid replied that she was just a little scared. After that, she thanked Gaspar for his help. The knight himself treated his four-legged friends well and stroked one of the horses. Sovor noticed that now everyone who laughed at the Count for allegedly wasting money buying horses had suffered a defeat. They were deprived of all their horses, which were given to the soldiers. The knight said that since childhood the Count had taken part in many wars. That's why he understood how important mobility was. It was clear that the knight was delighted with his master. He called the Count the wisest man. He probably would have spoken for a long time if he had not been stopped. But he still noticed that on cold days like today, the Count personally goes out to the pasture. Bianca was thinking about something else at that moment. She wondered if she could ever get a horse and ride it. When she voiced this out loud, Vincent said that riding a war horse was dangerous, and her maid expressed the same opinion. Sovor asked if she knew how to control a horse, to which Bianca replied that wasn't that a reason to learn. People are not born with all the skills at once. However, Sovor noted that the character of war horses was very different. They are very sensitive and intelligent. If a stranger climbs on its back, the horse will be extremely unhappy. Vincent noted that there were ladies who learned to ride, but if she wanted to, she would have to ask the Count for permission. Such permission was given only after the Count's approval. Bianca told the butler to get this permission for her. She didn't know if her husband would allow her to do this, since she had lost the first battle. When talking about an escort, she was unable to defend herself. However, Bianca decided it was time to go and said that Sovor had done a good job. She then added that if she got permission, they would cross paths more often when she learned to ride, and she was counting on it. After that, she stroked the foal with the back of her hand and said that they would see each other again, calling him her friend. The baby reached out to her softly. It was very cute. When they left the stable, Sovor was left with strange feelings. He couldn't believe that his mistress was behaving like this. He was used to her extravagant behavior. However, then Robert noticed Sovor and asked why he was standing outside in such cold weather. He said that the Countess had recently come here. He noticed that she didn't look disgusted. Sovor thought that it was dirty and smelled terrible here, and she would order him not to come close to her, but it turned out that the mistress was much better than he thought. Robert asked again if this was really true, to which he received the answer that if a person is kind to animals and children, then he is a good person. Sovor said she called the baby a friend. He noticed that the Countess was not afraid of huge war horses. She even asked politely if she could take a ride on one. It was noble. The knight suddenly realized that he was amazed by his mistress's behavior, and it seemed even fell in love. However, Robert was skeptical about this. He did not understand what was going on in Arno. After a long day, Yvonne was preparing the bed for her mistress. She had just finished warming it up while Bianca was taking a bath. Lately, she has become even more sensitive to the Countess, and I tried to do everything possible to ensure that she did not experience any inconvenience. When she came out of the bath, she was surprised that Yvonne had not left yet. The maid noticed that she had just finished warming her bed and asked if she would allow her to dry her hair. However, the lady said that everything was fine. Yvonne could come back. She also needed to rest. After saying goodbye to her, Bianca climbed into a warm bed. She loved to let her hair down and lie down under a warm blanket. However, she needed to check her homework. It was necessary to evaluate the lace that the seamstress had woven. She noticed that she had done it very beautifully. Perhaps she could create her own pattern or train other seamstresses. Bianca fingered the lace and felt herself relax completely. At some point, she felt so good that she seemed to float. Warmth enveloped her after the winter day. She dropped the dish containing the lace. It fell lightly beside her and she fell asleep. Through it, she heard someone knock on the door and enter the room. The girl felt her hair being wiped with a towel, just like her nanny used to do when she was a child. It was so tender that she couldn't help but wake up. When she turned around, she saw the Count next to the bed. She was surprised by his appearance, but he remained silent. He just looked at her. Lying on the bed, Bianca asked what he was doing there. It was very late. He should have been resting long ago. Nothing like this had happened in her past life until she was 20. Could it be that the Count changed his mind because she told him that she wanted to have an heir as soon as possible? Bianca thought that if she was given such an opportunity, she should take full advantage of it. She grabbed the Count and pulled him towards her, and then simply mounted him. However, she didn't know what to do next. Sitting on him, she didn't understand how to behave further. Her fantasies hadn't gone any further yet. Trying to calm herself, she reminded herself that she might be young in body, but in spirit he is almost 10 years older than the Count. Leaning towards him for a kiss, she tried to psych herself up because she believed that everything would work out. Suddenly, Bianca experienced a strange feeling that had been inaccessible to her before. However, at that very moment, something unexpected happened. The Count simply turned her upside down, destroying her hopes for an heir. He apologized for scaring her. He came to her with one question, but she fell asleep with a wet head. He told her that there was no point in suffering from a cold again, so he wanted to dry her hair and leave. At that moment, Bianca cursed everything around her because the Count turned out to be too quick. Offended, she asked what he was going to ask her in the middle of the night. Here she felt that he was trying to make up an excuse. He asked her how Gaspar was, if she had experienced any discomfort over the past few days when he was around. Bianca noted that even if she felt uncomfortable, she would still be accompanied because he felt more comfortable when someone was around. Apart from the fact that Gaspar has a massive body with a very noticeable build, he takes good care of her. The Count asked again in a strange way, which meant he was looking after her well. Bianca looked at him in surprise and wondered why this was happening to him. He himself asked her opinion, and she answered that everything was fine. It was unclear why he put on such a displeased expression then, and anyway, her neck was already stiff from looking up at him. The Count was too tall when he looked like that, you had to lift your head even higher. Bianca turned to him and called him darling. It happened somehow automatically, she didn't even notice it. However, the Count was amazed he had never heard such an address from her before. He was shocked to the depths of his soul and could not hide it under his usual mask of composure. He asked who she was addressing like that. Bianca asked who else but him, then said that she just had one question for him. She patted the bed next to her and then asked if he could sit next to her. She felt uncomfortable talking with him standing over her. The Count again made his face inscrutable but still sat down on the bed. Bianca wondered if he was really going to sit there with his back turned to her and why he had suddenly become so obedient. She said that perhaps Vincent had already told him everything, that she wanted to learn horse riding and for that she needed his permission. Afraid that he would object, she said that her family was a line of knights. He was also a knight, and she had been told that sometimes ladies were taught horse riding. And since she is a warrior's wife, she should at least be able to ride a horse. The Count remarked that horse riding was a sport that required a lot of endurance and that it might be too hard for her, but Bianca was already angry again. She asked if he hadn't said that if she needed anything, she could just tell Vincent. Now she wanted to learn horse riding. She thought to herself that he was treating her like a child again. She then added that just because learning will be difficult doesn't mean it's impossible. The Count crossed his arms and said she was right. However, it is better to start learning to ride in early spring rather than in winter, because it is difficult to find a good pony in winter. After that, he asked if he could wait until he found a suitable animal. Bianca was surprised by such a quick victory and immediately agreed. After this, the Count said that she could tell Vincent that her training would begin in early spring. Bianca suddenly felt a sense of victory that she had managed to persuade the Count. She cried out that she was so happy, which again surprised her husband quite a bit. Her face literally broke into a smile. He hadn't seen her like this for a long time, or never at all. However, she immediately realized that she had unconsciously shown joy at her first victory. This will make him think she is acting like a child again. However, he had already turned away. Bianca was amazed that he was so upset by her smile that he didn't even want to look at it. If you think about it, that's true, the Count wasn't interested in her from the very beginning. To him, she was a little child who didn't even have a clue how to buy expensive things. So, of course, he doesn't care what she does. However, here the Count spoke up and announced that he had to go to the capital of Laos in late spring because of the engagement ceremony of Albert, the eldest son of the heir to the throne. Bianca lowered her eyes and understood that in her past life, everything was the same in July of that same year. The Count was absent for a very long time. He continued by saying that this summer marks the 50th anniversary of His Majesty's accession to the throne, so events will be held frequently. In order to avoid constantly traveling back and forth, the Count thought of staying in the capital for a long time. It is quite possible that he will return in the fall or even at the beginning of winter. Bianca realized that the previous scenario was repeating itself. They would not have an heir anyway, and the Count would die in the war. Then the same fate awaits her. She will be kicked out of the estate without receiving a single penny of her dowry back. She will live until she dies, choking on a bloody cough. And no one will need her. She will become a nagging wife from Arno, who is constantly pointed at. If she lives the same life, it begs the question of why she was brought back in the first place. The very thought of returning hurt her. She could hardly hold back her tears as she recalled her fate. However, at that moment she heard the Count call her. Unable to hide her sniffle, she asked him what was going on. The Count explained that he had originally intended to talk about it just before leaving, but he had an idea that she might like. He noted that he could not make the final decision himself, and everything depended on her, which was very important. Her husband asked if she might want to go to Laos with him. If the human soul had a form, it would initially be like hard, colorless glass. However, over time, colors began to appear on it, and Bianca felt that it was drawn to her. From that moment on, warm and soft shades began to appear on the glass of their souls. They could already touch each other with their hands, doing it so tenderly and reverently. These touches were filled with affection and warmth, as if two worlds were merging into one. So they continued, connecting ever deeper, experiencing new feelings and emotions. When he asked Bianca again if she wanted to go to the capital with him, she froze. He said that there would be a lot of people there, because after all, they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the king's accession to the throne and the engagement of the crown prince. Bianca's background gave her a keen understanding of art and furniture. He said that if she got bored there, she would at least be able to see various luxury items. He was still convinced that she was only interested in spending money, the girl thought bitterly. However, something completely different was important to her. She would be with him on the journey. They would be together, and there would be a chance to change her destiny. Laos was not just a city, but the very heart of the continent. The center of industry and the capital of the kingdom, all this could not fail to amaze. Bianca raised her head and expressed a desire to go. After that, she added more softly that she wanted to go with him, emphasizing the last word. But she had a feeling that she would never get another chance like this, and she desperately wanted to take it. It was important. For the first time, she decided to do what she wanted. Robert was the last to arrive at the Count's office and apologized for being late. He discussed supplies and issues related to the capital with the guys and was greeted by Sovor. Vincent was there and said that in the morning the lady said that she wanted to take a break from her studies. The butler, in the morning she came and said that she wanted to do something else, and he was better at handling household matters than she was. After that, she added that he is the best in this business, and that she doesn't even trust herself in this as much as he does. He didn't even dare to be upset. After all, the lady called him the best. Robert said she was hinting that she just didn't want to deal with all of this because it took a lot of time and energy, but Vincent said she had a lot of things to do before spring. The knight asked why exactly until spring, and Vincent replied that it was because she was going to Laos. She told him that she wanted to finish a lot of things before this trip. The knights were surprised that the lady decided to travel such a distance. After all, everyone was convinced that she was very capricious, and the trip could turn into hell for everyone. Robert was shocked. Did the lady really want to go to the capital? And Sovor said that Gaspar would apparently accompany her on the journey. The Count, turning away from them, continued to hold on to his thoughts. Sovor suddenly became thoughtful while eating delicious donuts. The Count said Bianca thought Gaspar was doing a great job, and that he would be with her as long as she wanted him to be. Here, Sovor raised his hand and declared that if a place became available next to the lady, he was ready to guard her. It was a genuine display of enthusiasm, which greatly embarrassed Robert. However, Sovor said that he was speaking seriously, since the lady seemed to him to be a beautiful lady, and he would like to be closer to her. Robert expressed doubt, but the Count also wondered why he wanted to get closer to Bianca. However, Sovor tried to get out of it by declaring that she was the head of the house when the master was absent. Because of this, a squabble began between the knights, while the lady calmly walked around the palace. The Count remembered how she had said that she wanted to go with him, emphasizing the last word. Then he just got out of bed without saying anything. But then he turned around and replied that he would prepare everything. Already on the way out, Bianca turned to him again, calling him darling. After that, she said that she was grateful to him, and added that she sincerely felt it. The Count was very surprised by such an impulse. He did not expect such behavior. But he wished her good night and simply walked out. And now I thought that when she thanked him, she did it sincerely. This kept. Several months passed. The cold season has ended, and spring has slowly begun to come into its own. It was getting warmer, and the days were becoming more eventful. Nicola went to the Countess. In his hands he held a chest with his latest works. He passed by the workers, who noticed that the lady had not been seen anywhere lately, although she had often walked around before. One said that the lady was probably sick. The other noted that she had first looked around and wanted to help, but realizing that there were too many worries, she decided to throw off this responsibility. Nicola heard them say that she was just making up an excuse, and there were also rumors that she and other women were getting together to make useless trinkets. However, according to them, women have never been able to do anything worthwhile. Nicola did not approve of this conversation and loudly became indignant, saying that they did not understand anything at all and should not chatter. The man rudely rejected him, calling him a little shepherd. He wanted to grab him by the collar but didn't have time. Nicola ran a fair distance away and simply stuck his tongue out at them. He rushed to the place where women had recently gathered. When he arrived, he saw a familiar seamstress in the window and said hello. She asked him why he was there, and he asked if the lady had arrived yet. The girl replied that she had not come yet. There were women sitting in the room and doing lace making. One of them came up with a very original design. Looking at it, the other one remarked that the lady would be delighted with it. A woman holding a child noted that she enjoys this even more than weaving, and thanks to this, she can be close to the baby while working without fear of harming him. Another woman spoke about the timely payment for work from the lady, although at first she believed the rumors, but it was clear from Yvonne that the Countess cared about her people. She noted the gray squirrel fur coat that had once belonged to the mistress and was now in the possession of the maid. Moreover, the lady said that she would not leave her in debt if the girl could come up with something beautiful. The seamstress noticed the boy and asked why he was there. He replied that he had made a new candle and had tried to make the patterns more refined. He wanted to show it first to the lady, and then to the butler. The work turned out to be truly unique. All the girls were delighted and called the boy a genius. However, the girls did not know when she would come. At this time she was immersed in memories. It seemed as if she heard a voice calling her name. But it was not the Count's voice, but that of another person. This was the one she allowed herself to be close to. She reproached herself for this more than once. It seemed as if a voice was calling her, but she did not want to hear it. However, in her imagination, the steps were getting closer, becoming very close. Then she turned around and asked who it was. A melodic voice said that it was he, the man of her life. There were difficult moments in her life, and Fernand appeared before her again. He was here again and he was too close. Bianca remembered how they were in her estate and began to cry. The memories changed. Her brother asked why his aunt was crying. Was it really because his sister was getting married? The aunt answered in the affirmative, noting that Bianca could marry the Duke, but would remain with the poor Baron. Outraged by the way her father had dealt with her fate, her aunt thought that he was wrong and unfair. The father turned to his daughter, saying that from now on, she was the lady of the House of Arnaud, and not Blanchefort. He emphasized that she must keep the hearth and home, protect her family, and live out her last day in the mansion. The Count added that she should never forget this. There would be no turning back, and no matter the circumstances, she would remain in the Arnaud family. When the Baron came for her, she realized that she could no longer go back. Zachary stated that he was taking responsibility for her life. He could not give her wealth and influence, but he promised to care for and cherish her. Bianca didn't know what to say and was afraid of this man. Rumors began to circulate about the Count having a mistress, and there were rumors that the mistress no longer allowed the Count to sleep in her bed, assuming that this was due to the mistress. Bianca heard the maids say that the mistress had married at a young age when she was not yet mature. They also said that she was too thin to bear children and called her a dependent, wondering how she dared to spend his money if she herself rejected him. Bianca thought then that everything that happened between them was just the fulfillment of obligations, and that he already had a loved one. Then Fernand appeared and declared that the Count's heart was indeed taken. This tempter said that the way out for her was to give herself to another, because the Count's heart could no longer be obtained. He promised to love her and fill her lonely and broken heart with his love. He assured that his great love would be enough for both of them. Bianca remembered trying to deny it. But when she was angry and furious, remembering the past, she asked him where he was when she was thrown out of Arnaud's house. Bianca screamed that she gave him everything, and he threw away her feelings like they were trash. When she had lost everything and needed him most, he left her. Fernand extended his hand to her and said that he had promised her love, not eternal love. He had consoled her when she needed it. She realized that he was right. Yes, he comforted her, and she no longer needed him. She thought that she was loved, that she herself loved someone, but it was a lie. There had never been true love between them, and now she understood that she had to remain under the Count's care, even if his heart and mind were already occupied with the image of another girl. She got love and comfort, the feelings she wanted, but she could have lost everything because of it. She crossed the line. At that moment, Bianca felt someone squeeze her hand. If she had known that she would lose everything, she would never have accepted Fernand. Bianca sat and still could not escape from the painful memories. At that moment, she heard her name being called. The Count leaned over her and asked if she was in pain. The girl looked up at him and wondered when he had managed to arrive. Looking at him, she realized that he was the only one who was always there, no matter what. Still, she couldn't get from him what she wanted most in the world. Bianca replied that she was not in pain and asked what he wanted. The husband replied that she would like to go for a walk with him. The day was sunny and beautiful. The walk should have cheered her up. However, the Count walked ahead, and she could barely keep up with him. Bianca felt as if she were behind him, as if behind a stone wall. He seemed to be showing off his long legs. They spent so little time together that they practically didn't know each other. For her, the Count was a man she always watched from afar. She was afraid to approach him, despite the fact that he was her husband. He was a tall man, and always seemed a little scary to her because of his taciturnity. She finally managed to catch up with him only because he stopped. Bianca asked if they were there yet, and he replied that they needed to go a little further. As soon as she asked why they had stopped, he began walking again. But now it's much slower. She thought that maybe he had finally realized that he needed to match her steps. Then she began to doubt whether she had understood him correctly, and then I thought that maybe he was out of breath himself. It was, of course, completely unbelievable. The Count, with his military endurance, could have covered much greater distances. At that moment, he raised his hand to show her something. She looked in the direction he was pointing, and I was struck to the depths of my soul. Thanks to the warmer weather, she could dress much lighter. She looked quite good now and was happy about it, but what she saw shocked her. There was a horse of incredible beauty standing under the tree. He already had a saddle and stirrup on. He was simply stunning. Bianca wondered if it was true. She looked at the Count and could not believe her eyes. He looked at her and said that this was his promise he made in the winter, after which he brought her closer. Bianca looked at the horse and wondered if she could touch it. After that, she hesitantly extended her hand towards the horse. What a blessing that the horse wasn't scared and didn't back away. Bianca thought she was so affectionate, it seemed like she wouldn't run away even without a leash. Smart girl. It was an incredible feeling. For the first time, she was given something so dear and valuable, someone else's life. She couldn't find the words to express what she was feeling right now. The Count, looking at her, said that he was very glad that she liked it. After that, he extended his arms as if trying to hug her. Bianca was completely confused. She didn't understand what was happening. All this time he was cold and seemingly indifferent, and then suddenly there appeared a tender embrace that she did not expect at all. As always, she made it up more. The husband easily bent down, grabbed her by the waist and lifted her up, after which he told her to try to ride a horse. Bianca was in shock. Even her father had never raised her like that as a child. Her dress flew up and she felt awkward. However, her husband had already seated her on the horse. After that, he asked her if she was scared, and she didn't know what to think. So she answered the first thing that came to her mind and realized that she was not afraid. Taking her hand, he said that from tomorrow he would begin teaching her to ride. Bianca replied that she was very grateful, but did not want to take up his time. She suggested asking Vincent to find her a teacher. The girl knew how busy he was. However, he looked at her and said that she was not taking up his time at all. He wants to teach her himself. It is his desire. He then added that he had failed to take proper care of her and had missed out on a lot of time that could have been spent together. And he said he regretted it. All this time he held her hands, and Bianca suddenly began to feel embarrassed. The Count noticed this and said that she had already mastered the horse. Therefore, she needs to hold on tightly to the leash, after which they can go to explore the territory. Then he asked if she would also go to the ladies today. She answered positively, and then he said that we needed to move in that direction. He led the horse by the bridle so that it could get used to the saddle. Bianca thought she remembered him as a large, stern man. Maybe it was because she always looked up to him. And now, when the angle changed, he even seemed a little vulnerable to her. Suddenly she felt that he was all hers, but she realized that she had now begun to indulge in dreams again. At that moment, the Count turned to her and asked if he could ask her something. Then he asked a question she never expected to hear, why she no longer called him by the same name as before. Bianca didn't understand. She just didn't pay attention. He looked down and asked how much lace her craftswomen had embroidered. The girl wondered if he was really interested in that, although most likely Gaspar and Vincent had told him everything. She remarked to him that although the materials were quite cheap, the lace itself was expensive and valuable. And then she declared that it would conquer the whole world, and he would definitely see it. She had big plans for this case. The Count asked why she thought so. She couldn't say that she knew the future. That's why she said that it just seemed that way to her. But if everything goes as she expects, it will only be a big plus for them. The Count asked if she was perhaps still worried and afraid that he would not be able to earn large sums. After all, this is exactly how he spoke to his wife at the very beginning, saying that he had just received the title and was very poor. However, Bianca said she had no doubt about their worth after what she saw in the stables, where one horse cost as much as an entire mansion. She noted that she said this just like that, but in the future she wants to have solid ground under her feet. Bianca doesn't want to be just a daughter, wife, or mother, but rather a person who isn't dependent on just one relationship. She just wants to be herself, strong and independent. Her husband asked again if she wanted to gain strength and independence. He considered her way of thinking to be excellent, since it was suitable for the wife of a knight. Bianca was indignant and laughed, saying that she wasn't looking for compliments. She said this out loud and added that she wanted to have a son from him. The Count remarked that he did not want to have a child during the war, and that she needed to strengthen her strength and not waste time. The husband noted that if their child was born, she would be remembered not as the girl who created lace, but as the mother of the future Count Arno. Bianca asked what was wrong with that, because a married girl should be thinking about her husband and heir, but she was left to be sad and worried because her other half was always on the front lines. Her husband was stunned by such revelations. He noticed that it must be difficult for her. He reminded that a lady could lose her life before, during, and after childbirth, and her husband, a knight, could die at any moment. Suddenly, Bianca remembered a story she had once overheard. There was a story of a young man who was the second son of the Viscount Vigue, who was driven from his home at the age of 16. It was the sad past of that strong knight, who at such a young age faced the injustice and cruelty of the world. He built his name and his achievements from scratch. That was the story of Zachary d'Arnaud, the man who was now leading her on horseback. These were two souls that would have already lived in unison if they had met under different circumstances. However, Bianca was too young when she married him, and he probably went towards the pain of battle without fully understanding it. Life turned out the way it did, and there was nothing that could be changed. Bianca, remaining in timid silence, turned to her husband. However, in her heart she was sure that she was right. Her husband wanted to answer but could not find the words. At that moment they heard a cry. The seamstress shouted that their mistress was sitting majestically on a horse. The Count realized that their moments of solitude were over. Bianca was disappointed and felt sorry for the wasted minutes. However, the girl still screamed and called her, saying that Nicola was really waiting for her. Finally, she saw that their master was there too. The seamstress immediately became embarrassed and began to apologize. Bianca thought, why now of all times? Her husband turned around, made an inscrutable face, and said that they were already waiting for her. He would take the horse himself. He helped his wife down to the ground. After that, he noticed that if Bianca gave the horse a name, they would become closer faster. Already on the move, he shouted at her to think about it for now and turned away. However, he turned around again and said that this was her first assignment in horse riding lessons. She stood alone, despite the fact that there were many people around, and suddenly she felt lonely. She felt so warm and comfortable in his company, and this was how the 19th spring of her life began. And this feeling promised her a lot, which made it very different from all the previous ones. At this time, other things were happening in the capital. Behind the rose bushes stood two people indulging in mutual caresses. The girl said that her husband probably waited for her, and the interlocutor replied that she should forget about him when she was in his arms. But suddenly there was a noise, after which the girl saw someone enter. She ran away headlong. The man tried to stop her. And then I thought that I wouldn't want to play with such a timid one for long. He turned to the man who had entered and asked if he had found out what he had asked him about. He answered positively, calling him Your Majesty the Second Prince, Count Arno, will arrive in the capital with his wife. The man, who belonged to the royal family, noticed that the iron-blooded's wife would also be here. At that time, the king had 3 children. The second queen was supposed to take care of the second prince, according to the tradition of the kingdom of Sevran. The next king would be the first prince, which was clear, since the eldest son was entitled to the inheritance. However, the second prince had his own plans for this matter. His attention was drawn to the man who addressed him. Prince Jacob turned and greeted Count Blanchefort. He appeared with his son, Bianca's older brother. The Count introduced his son, naming him Joachim. The second prince remarked that he had recently heard some interesting news. He said that Count Arno was going to come to the capital with his wife, who, if he remembered correctly, was the daughter of Count Blanchefort. That same 9-year-old girl whom he married off to an adult knight, is that true? The prince noticed that his mother was extremely worried that her relative's daughter would marry a baron she did not know. The Count's son remarked that His Majesty was being too rude, but his father stopped him and said that it was quite natural that the second queen was worried. At this moment, that same baron has become Count Arno, the hero of their continent, and therefore no one will be able to oppose the country when His Highness the First Prince becomes king. The second prince merely chuckled and said that he was already looking forward to the day when he would have the chance to meet this hero in person. And if he's lucky, he'll even meet the countess. After which he turned around and, without saying goodbye, headed back to his place. The son tried to tell his father that the prince had insulted them as a family, even if they were from different factions, and asked if he didn't know how Count Arno had risked his life to repel Aragon's attacks and defend the lands. However, his father was now troubled by another thought. He turned to his son and told him to come home and write a letter, saying that upon their arrival he wanted to meet Bianca before anyone else. Joachim was shocked and asked if his father was serious. After all, then he would be able to meet Bianca for the first time in 10 years, since his father even forbade him to send and receive letters from her. Her father said that she was already 19 years old this year, and now she was most likely already living as a full-fledged wife. If she was anything like her mother, she had grown up to be a beautiful lady, but he hadn't seen Bianca at the time. All dirty, she got off her horse. Her maid asked if she was okay, but Bianca replied that her hips and buttocks hurt like crazy. She let go of the reins, unable to hold on to them any longer, and she could have even fallen if strong arms had not caught her. The count, who was nearby, immediately drew his wife to him. Holding her in his arms, he said that her idea of taking up horse riding was very useful, and if she continued, her stamina would increase and her health would improve. After which he suggested saying goodbye to the horse, noting that it would be better to take it to the stable. But then, until she leaves for Laos, she won't be able to move a muscle without pain. Bianca reached out to Isabel, said goodbye, and said that she was heavy, but the horse had done a good job. After which Bianca turned to her husband. She said it was too heavy and she would rather walk on her own 2 feet. However, he hugged her tighter, despite the fact that those around them were watching them. He noticed that she wasn't heavy at all, and someone who only eats a few olives in the morning can't weigh much. Bianca noted that she simply had no appetite this morning, but who had already managed to report what she had for breakfast. The count only grinned and did not answer her, but said that the more time she spent in the fresh air, the sooner she would begin to eat more. The girl indignantly asked to let her go, saying what the servants would think. However, the count did not pay attention to this and said that it was better this way than for his tired wife to go herself. Bianca still couldn't get used to how stubborn he was. The count chuckled and said that he shouldn't tell her about it. She could easily give him a head start. Thus, before the trip to Laos, the couple were able to spend more time together. But this was still not enough to make up for lost time. It took only enough time to realize that they were frowning at each other, not because they didn't love each other. The matter was completely different. The count praised Bianca when she began to ride a horse well. He showed how to properly pull the reins in the right direction. She had almost learned to control the horse, but she noticed that her husband was thinking about something and asked him. He hesitated but answered anyway. The count said he had already broached the subject, but would like to ask again why she had not called him dear lately. Bianca was surprised. She didn't pay attention to it. However, she remembered the first time she told him this when he was in her bedroom. The second time she addressed him in the same way was when he was leaving. Bianca was surprised. It was a long time ago, but he remembers and asks such questions without any emotion on his face. She just wanted to say wait then, but it came out as darling, so he simply misunderstood her. And were they close enough at that moment to call each other that? They were officially married, but their relationship was far from a real marriage. It was obvious that the count was upset by this answer, but he answered briefly, but then he could not restrain himself and said that it seemed to him because it was a hint that it was time to address each other in a special way. In response, Bianca said that now he was her riding teacher and she was his student, and later they would discuss everything. The count looked at her mysteriously, and she turned away importantly and asked him to wait a little longer because she and Isabel would soon be able to surpass him and Noah. The count laughed and wondered if she was really sure of that. Bianca looked and was surprised by his sincere smile. She realized that she saw her so rarely that each time it was like the sparkle of a diamond. At such moments he looked just like a child. He continued the conversation and said that he accepted the challenge. After that, he made a completely unexpected movement. He touched her nose with his finger. Then he said that he very much hoped that this day would come as soon as possible. And he noticed that the horse would stop if it pulled that hard. Their conversation was overheard by workers in the fields. They were surprised at how the count and countess were having fun. She laughed, not expecting him to touch her nose. Rumors were rife that the lady was doing something mysterious with the seamstresses, and there was talk of spending money on luxurious candles. At the same time, new small changes in the relationship between the Count and his wife began to appear, and a strange anticipation hung over the estate again. It was an expectation and hope for the imminent appearance of an heir, but at that time a letter arrived from Blanchefort to the addressee. The Count, having opened it, thought that this was the first letter from the Count, although no, it was already the second, the first he received during the preparations for the lady's wedding. The letter said that the father wanted to meet Bianca as soon as they arrived in Laos. The Count said that he himself would let Bianca know about this as soon as the time came, but for now the letter should be kept silent. It is important to remember that small mistakes can lead to big problems. The day before leaving for Laos, one of these happened. The lady swore and screamed, and Vincent tried to calm her down. Bianca was indignant and shouted why she only found out about this the day before leaving. Without stopping, she asked when Vincent was going to tell her everything. At that moment, the Count was rereading the letter he had received. In it, the father wrote that the capital's rumors said that he intended to visit Laos with the Countess. The Count was rather dry, but he said he looked forward to meeting them both there. The signature included the name of Count Georges de Blanchefort, and it was also stated that the letter was written by Joachim de Blanchefort. The letter asking to meet with the daughter was overly formal, apparently. The older brother is the same as the father. Count Blanchefort never asked how Bianca was doing. According to Vincent, Bianca never corresponded with him, and the Count wondered whether he should let her meet with the family that had forgotten about her for 9 years. They wouldn't have remembered her if it weren't for this trip. Looking out the window at the Countess, he thought that it had been a long time since he had had riding lessons, which is why he had not seen his wife with her hair tied up for a long time, although he liked to see her with loose curls better. Thus his thoughts drifted from important experiences to thoughts about his own wife. The day before leaving for Laos, the Arnaud castle was busy preparing for departure. At some point, it was decided to leave 15 of the lady's boxes in order to lighten the luggage, to which she demonstratively expressed indignation that she had already taken so few things. However, she decided to take a closer look and asked if these were really all the Count's things, to which she received an affirmative answer. Bianca demanded an explanation and asked if their county was really that poor. Vincent replied that nothing of the sort was the case. Bianca thought that overall their things were not so bad and that the Count had many war horses, but why then was everything so modest? She began to look at the Count's chests and thought that the shirts there were too old, and the vest that she took out was the one he wore while riding a horse. And what kind of low-quality fur was used? Vincent noticed that the Count was a very ordinary man and preferred to wear simple clothes, but Bianca complained that the clothes were not only simple, but also untidy. It was no accident that she took it upon herself to check his luggage, otherwise Vincent would not have told her that the Count's things looked like floor rags. In fact, they were of good quality, but they did not at all correspond to the lady's aesthetics. Bianca demanded to open the other chests to see what was inside. She was sure that there were a lot of rags there again. At this point, Yvonne said that the butler had allowed her to take more things just to calm her down. She sarcastically remarked that she already had enough of everything, after which she ordered Vincent to empty the drawers so that she could choose suitable clothes herself. When she was satisfied with the result, Vincent heard that the lady was going to the capital to buy new clothes for her husband. The butler was shocked. Bianca stated that her husband was not a man of simple military customs. He should not look like a typical commoner, and how could she walk hand in hand with a villager? Without making such a statement, Vincent said that he agreed with it. At this time, the Count watched what was happening from the window of his office. He thought that Bianca had taken control of Vincent. He didn't know what was going on there, but he had never seen him so awkward before. However, he was surprised when another interlocutor joined them. It was Sauveur, but why was he there? The Count remembered how he had said that he wanted to get along with Bianca, and something had stabbed him in the chest. He became interested in what they were talking about now. It was impossible to hear through the window, but Bianca asked if Sauveur would really like to take the Count's things for himself. He noticed that she still wanted to throw them away, and decided that it would be better if she gave them to him. Bianca noticed that they had different body types. He said that he was bigger than Robert, and Gaspard was too tall, so his build was closer to the Count's. A former peasant, he couldn't afford to throw away the clothes, and eventually Bianca agreed to give them to him. He said that he would choose what he needed and take the things with him. Bianca thought that she was always so tired after talking to Sauveur. She decided to rest a little and then put her luggage in order, although there was nothing left to sort through. By chance, she didn't know how long he had been watching her and felt awkward. Lately, she saw him every day, but it was more pleasant to watch him from afar. But when she looked up again, she realized she had been looking too long. Despite the fact that they had been communicating for a long time, they rarely met each other's eyes. At that moment, it seemed to her that it had happened. However, he immediately disappeared from the window. The Count didn't even move away, he simply sat down. It was completely unexpected for him. He had not intended to look her in the eyes at all. And to him, as an adult man, spying on a girl seemed indecent. He was afraid that she might feel uneasy about his surveillance. When he first married Bianca, it was difficult to even get close to her. He didn't know how to communicate with his young wife, and the fact that he kept his distance only made the situation more difficult. But now they could calmly look into each other's eyes. Sometimes she even answered him with a smile. However, all of his nights could easily start a conversation with her, which made him feel a bit strange. He recalled how he was persuaded to marry by being told that the Count would guarantee personal success and national security, and so he could tolerate the criticism that came his way because of his marriage with a child. There was nothing wrong with the fact that the marriage was purely formal, but at some point it started to become a problem because feelings started to appear. He remembered the warmth of her touch, her hand. The Count remembered how she asked if he had been worried about her all this time. He had previously had reserved feelings for her because she had been dragged into adulthood too early, and now he hoped that he would no longer have to suffer because of the obligations she had been forced into against her will. The time had come to leave. The sun had barely risen, and everyone was packed and ready to set off. Bianca really wanted to talk to the Count, but he seemed to be very busy. He was giving out final instructions, and she was unable to express what was troubling her. After they made eye contact yesterday, she decided to wave to him. However, she didn't know if he saw it and wanted to ask him. But there was nowhere to go. I had to get into the carriage. Throughout the long, tiring journey, Bianca thought only about when she would be able to talk to the Count. Looking at the whole unreal situation that accompanied them, she didn't even think that everything could change. Fate was about to take a new turn that could turn her life upside down. However, now she could still enjoy the idyll she had created. She was seen off by people who respected her. She could enjoy the journey in comfort with maximum convenience. At the same time, the Count and the others set off on horseback. And, as always, the black wolf flag proudly fluttered above them. The Count gave the command to start the journey, and their road began. Several days passed since the departure of the lady and the Count. Vincent was carrying out his mistress's orders. He brought the seamstresses the golden linen thread they had asked for. Vincent was quite happy, so the seamstress asked what had happened. He replied that perhaps it was getting warmer, and that was why he felt better. The butler stated that he would not interfere with the girls continuing their work. Everyone laughed and said that it wasn't the good weather at all. He simply felt more comfortable since the lady had left, and there was no longer any reason to grumble about expenses. Although he actually liked the lady herself very much, otherwise he would have abandoned his duties long ago. Before, she just sat in her room and did luxurious things. And now the relationship with the Count has changed so much that it won't be long before there is an heir. And the girls received expensive threads. There were enough of them to create a lot of beautiful lace, for which the lady had great plans. Before leaving, she said that she would show all the lace they made at Loaz at the first opportunity, and after that, many nobles would send requests to Arno. In the meantime, they were to continue improving the patterns and finished lace, and Vincent would help them in everything. Bianca declared that from now on, they would not be seamstresses or weavers, but proud lace makers in Arno. The girls were surprised that she was so kind to them. She gave Nicola her last assignment. She said that she was going to visit the sanctuary and thank God for sending such talented craftsmen to Arno. The child was impressed by her words. They were like balm for the soul. The lady was leaving, and the girls looked after her with some sadness. In the short period from winter to spring, they acquired a lot thanks to the lady. Nicola could make beautiful candles with his own hands and did not hide it from others. The girls were engaged in embroidery, creating unique works. They hoped for the safe return of the lady who had invested in their talents and potential. The short road was rendered impassable by a landslide. Therefore, there was one road left that could be used by horses, but a carriage could not pass there. It would have to be pushed. The Count asked how long the tour would take and was told it would take about 2 weeks. The Count's wife, who accompanied him, was not, contrary to expectations, restricted by the travel conditions, so they did not have to worry about delays. However, there was a downside. The road through the destroyed area passed through the village where they planned to stop. It became clear that because of this they would have to spend the night in the open air, and the Count thought about what to do. There were few options, they had too much baggage. Therefore, it was necessary to spend the night on site and then go around. The Count decided to explain everything to his wife himself. At this moment, Bianca was already looking out of the carriage, wanting to stretch her legs. Gaspar offered her his hand, but Yvonne refused. Looking at them, Bianca thought that he had always been very persistent with Yvonne. So she decided to stop arguing and told the maid to get down from the carriage to straighten her clothes. In the end, all she could do was accept the outstretched hand. Gaspar held her carefully to make her more comfortable. However, Bianca noticed a slight blush on his face. A thought flashed through her mind, but she didn't voice it out loud. But she stated that if a knight offers his hand to a lady, it must be accepted without hesitation. In response to Yvonne's silent question, Bianca said that for a knight, holding a lady's hand is the highest honor. She was adjusting Bianca's clothes when a new assistant appeared. Sovor suddenly appeared very close. He began to straighten the lady's hem and shake off the dust from her. He asked her if it was hard for her to sit in the carriage for a long time, noting that if she took a walk in that direction, she would see the valleys and the source of the Arno River. The knight looked like a little dog ready to serve, and offered to take her for a walk and accompany her. Bianca thought he was trying to make up for the fact that she had given him all the Count's things. However, she said that he could show her where to go, and she would go with Gaspar. Afterwards, he said that he would get lost in the three soses, but someone grabbed him by the shoulder, and he said that there was no need to pull the wool over the lady's eyes. It was Robert who reported that the Count was looking for the lady. At that moment, orders were being given everywhere. Horses were being taken away somewhere. Bianca was surprised by such a fuss, because they had stopped, as she thought, for a short rest. Robert asked if she was tired because she had been driving all day and might get carsick. He noted that there was still a long way to go, and therefore there was no need to hide it if she felt unwell. She felt like he was always interfering in her affairs and treating her badly, even though he looked like a girl himself. In general, he reminded me of Vincent, who just wanted to moo and grumble. Bianca thought he was implying that if she waited, she would simply faint and cause trouble. So she said sharply that he apparently didn't know her well, that she was far from being delicate enough to collapse from a simple sneeze, but that a journey in a carriage could be survived. Robert looked at her in surprise because he expected her whims. At that moment, the Count approached and turned to his wife. Bianca hadn't seen or heard from him for a long time, and she felt how much she missed him. He invited her to go for a walk to discuss something important, and he extended his hand to her, but she stood motionless as a stone. She thought that perhaps it was because they had not spoken for a long time that she felt a sense of joy at seeing him again. She extended her hand to him and thought that, looking at him, her heart was fluttering. For some reason, his heart was beating constantly without stopping. It seemed very strange. They reached the source of the Arno River, and it looked simply magical. It was the same river that flowed in front of the mansion. The Count decided to tell his wife how short this distance was. He looked at the falling petal and said that it would float to the castle in just half a day. Even the fastest horse will cover this distance in about 2 days. It was quite romantic. The beauty of this place strengthened hope. Bianca thought and said out loud that apparently this was the place Sovor wanted to show her she was missing out on so much by sitting in the mansion all the time. The Count noticed that he and Sovor had become friends recently. Bianca looked up and decided it was too much. She said that it would be too much to consider him a friend. He just wants to thank her. After that, putting her finger to her cheek, she suddenly thought and understood. Looking at the Count's face, it was clear that jealousy was awakening in him. She looked at him and simply said that he had no reason to do this. He looked at her and a sparkle appeared in his eyes. Afterwards, he stated that he would not be jealous. Bianca looked at him and wondered if he had really acknowledged this feeling. He offered her his arm again and said that it was time for them to go. For her, this gesture has already become so habitual, offering her hand to her husband. However, they did not hold hands to match their status as knight and lady. They did it because they could be closer. At the moment, it was the only gesture available to them. However, the Count's heart was restless. The words he was about to say to her could once again build up the wall between them that they had been so diligently tearing down lately. But Bianca noticed his confusion. She turned to him and asked what he was thinking about. He replied that he had two pieces of news. He cleared his throat and asked if he had had a good relationship with his brother when she lived in Blanchefort. Bianca asked again with Joachim. She decided that this was the right word to use, since after her mother died during childbirth, she only had a brother left. He always had a beaming smile on his face, and they were always fooling around together. He carried her on his shoulder, but he was always too cunning for a child. He got this from his father. Bianca thought so, but he hadn't even sent her a message for 10 years. She was too young then, but her brother always shared everything with her, except one thing. There was only one thing he couldn't give. It was a chocolate cake. They always gave her a small piece, but she wanted to eat more. She always wanted to take his portion, but it never worked out. He always teased her. One day she finally succeeded. She remembered how she ate that cake in a flash because she was afraid that it would be taken away. However, the cake was just a bribe. She remembered this day so well because it was then that they told her about her future wedding with the Baron. Her father did not prepare her in any way, and even the word wedding was unfamiliar to her then. So she just kept listening. She didn't know what exactly was behind it before the wedding, and she would have refused it immediately, even if she had to be capricious. But she had already taken the Count by the hand and followed him. At that moment, she had no idea that she would not be able to return to Blanchefort. Bianca suddenly felt sad. She hadn't given free rein to her memories for a long time. Bianca lowered her head, and the Count asked if everything was all right. He said that she seemed tired, and she nodded in agreement. Memories began to emerge of her father leading the fight against the Aragonese invasion on behalf of his son-in-law and lord. Back then, Bianca was just a bargaining chip for him. And she never saw them again. This is where the story of the Blanchefort family ended. They were defeated. Both died on the battlefield. She felt sick because she knew her imminent future, a future where no one will be around anymore. All her loved ones will die, even the Count. Even though she had no feelings for him in the past, they began to appear in the present. The husband brushed the hair from his wife's face and said that he was leading her to the fact that a letter had arrived from his father, and they wanted to meet. Bianca looked up and couldn't believe his words. The Count misunderstood this and said that if she didn't want to, she had the right to refuse. She realized that he really cared about her. How could she not notice his kindness in his past life? On some sudden instinct, she reached out and ran her fingers across his cheek. After that, she thanked him tenderly. She touched his lips lightly, causing his heart to flutter. However, she immediately removed her hand, remembering her past failure. The Count himself leaned over her, trying not to drown in the feelings that overwhelmed him. His heart beat wildly as he sank down after her hand. He ran his finger over her lips, and Bianca's heart almost jumped out from the overwhelming feeling. As he leaned over her, she wondered if he wanted to kiss her, and why so suddenly, although she had nothing against it. It was their first kiss since returning to the past, and she thought that maybe she shouldn't rush into it, but other than that there wouldn't be any more chances, and she offered her lips to him. At that moment, Yvonne opened the carriage, asking when they would return. She then added that she had been told that they would stay overnight immediately, and that Gaspar was to bring her the skin. However, she froze mid-sentence, starting to ask for forgiveness when she saw the flushed faces of the Count and Countess. Bianca immediately began to say that this was not what she thought, and asked the Count if this was the second piece of news he wanted to tell her, that they were staying there for the night. He asked her for forgiveness and said that he tried to avoid the situation so that she would sleep in the carriage. He had no other option, and she had every right to be angry. Bianca simply asked where he was going to sleep. Then she suggested that he really intended to sleep in her carriage, and he was taken aback. The Count suddenly blushed and even began to stutter, saying what people would think if they slept in the same carriage. Then Bianca thought to herself that they were already married, and it would be quite logical if they slept in the same carriage. He said it would be more convenient for him to sleep on the ground and for her to sleep here, so they wouldn't arouse suspicion. Bianca added that they could both sleep together, and that Yvonne and Gaspar could fit in too. The maid remarked that this would already be strange, and the Count replied that he had decided to sleep outside. Bianca would remain in the carriage, settling in with the maid. After that he turned, his face illuminated by the setting sun, and said he would continue the conversation later. The maid bowed to the Count as he left, still worried that she had disturbed such an intimate moment. However, the second piece of news concerned something else. The Count did not say that he wanted to talk to her about her reunification with her family, but because of the trembling of his hearts he could not do it, he simply forgot. They were unable to complete this conversation for the rest of the trip. 10 days have already passed since leaving the estate initially. It was planned to arrive a few days earlier. Eventually, they arrived in Laos, the capital of a country where great changes were taking place. This city held its position between Aragon and Castilla for 100 years. A pattern of red roses entwined with golden thorns, embroidered like sunbeams, adorned the flag of the Severin family. The flag was located on a fortress as high as a huge snowy mountain. Having arrived at the gates, the Count ordered them to be opened. After this, it was reported that he had arrived in the city by order of His Majesty the King. The huge gates began to descend. Bianca heard it said that it depicted a black wolf pattern, the symbol of the Arnaud family. He was respected and loved. He was a hero of the country. He was greeted so loudly that Bianca felt proud. People shouted, "Long live the furious Count." They were very hospitable to those who were always in the vanguard of the troops against Aragon. The residents truly loved this hero, who was always in a hurry to go on campaign. Bianca looked where Yvonne pointed. Even when we were already on Laos territory, it took a long time to get to the residence, which resembled a huge mountain. Therefore, there was a very long time left before the vacation. But everything comes to an end someday. Finally, the road came to an end when the sun was at its zenith. Bianca was shocked that this road had finally ended. Gras waited for her to leave the carriage. He said that the king was now in Princess Audrey's garden. Then he remarked that it was a private reception and the atmosphere would be relaxed, so she shouldn't worry. However, for his wife, this was her first outing, and she couldn't help but feel nervous. Bianca said she wanted to be calm, but she couldn't. It's not every day that you get to see the king. The Count, as always sensing her excitement, touched her hand. His touch always lit a light in her eyes. She loved it when he touched her like that. He asked if maybe he should go alone. Bianca smiled and said that everything was fine, she could handle it, he was next to her. Then he took her hand more tightly and asked her to go. The Laos Gardens were renowned for their diversity of native plants from across the continent. At that time, Princess Audrey and the Queen had their own gardens, and the king was especially fond of his daughter. The fact that he decided to meet the Count in the princess's garden signified a great deal of trust in him. Entering, the brother greeted him. The king greeted him, noticing that he had been eagerly awaiting him. Count Arnaud remarked that he was glad to see him in good health. The king asked who the beautiful lady was next to him. Bianca bowed and introduced herself. The king noted that this was their first meeting and introduced himself as Victor de Sevran, King of Sevran. He noticed that the Count had said that she had fallen ill and would not be able to come to Laos. He was pleased to see her before his death. After this, he said that my lady resembled the late Countess Blanchefort. Then the eldest prince, Gauthier de Sevran, introduced himself to her and said that he was quite close to her father, but that this was the first time he had met her in person. Showing the bouquet in his hand, he said that he would have given it to her if the roses had not been picked by the princess for his wife. Then he remarked that, however, Count Arnaud would soon give her another rose, one that would never fade. Bianca thought, not understanding what was being discussed. The king said that the North Tower, where they were staying, was the most picturesque place in Laos Castle, and they should have a good rest. The Count called Bianca with him as they were very tired. Bianca looked at the prince. She felt bad that she knew his fate. He died without ever having succeeded in gaining control of Sevran, and the throne was inherited not by Albert, the son of the first prince, but by the second prince, Jacob. It so happened that all the plans of her loved ones remained unfulfilled. Perhaps it was worth going over to the winning side. But this story belonged to her past life. Whether it will change now is unknown. Her family and Arnaud supported the first prince, but at this rate, the destruction of family relationships seemed to be a foregone conclusion. She was lost in thought and didn't notice how she bumped into someone. Already feeling that she was falling, she realized that someone was holding her. But it wasn't her husband. Someone asked if she was okay. After that, he looked at her and said that he was asking for forgiveness. He was in a hurry. Bianca said it was okay, that she had turned sharply, but the man was too close to her. He leaned towards her and asked what family the beautiful lady came from. At that moment, they heard someone call Bianca's name. She immediately moved away from the man, explaining that her husband was walking too close. After this, she angrily yelled at him, adding that if she had been distracted for a second and got lost, and even in an unfamiliar place. The Count asked her forgiveness in a reserved manner and extended his hand to her. He said that now he will not let her go. Then he looked at their interlocutor. His look was quite menacing. He smiled, showing all 32 teeth, and said, "Could this really be Countess Arnaud?" Everyone in the castle was asking about the Count's arrival, and he just wanted to see them. Arno turned to his wife and asked the second prince for forgiveness, saying that his wife had made a mistake. Bianca looked and thought, so this is what he is like, the second prince. The one who will get power, she thought, not only in Sevran, but throughout the continent. She instinctively pressed herself closer to her husband. After this, the prince introduced himself and said that he welcomed them to Loaz. He then asked Bianca if she knew that her mother was his mother's niece. Then he added that he was glad to meet his distant relative. He noted that he knew that his mother from Sevran was related to her, but Blanchefort never spoke about it and did not maintain relations with the royal family. Bianca thanked him for his concern and said that the fact that she was of royal blood did not surprise her all that much. Besides, she's not a member of the royal family, and there's nothing special about that. The Count realized that his wife was saying too much now. He pulled Bianca back and looked meaningfully into her eyes. Then she immediately asked for forgiveness, but the prince said that he himself asked for forgiveness if he had insulted her. Apparently he had crossed the line. The second prince noticed that she gave the impression of being a sincere person, so he asked her not to hide her feelings and to communicate with him as honestly as she did now. He then said that if anything bothered her during her stay in Laos, she could contact him. Bianca felt uncomfortable under his gaze. He stared so obsessively, not paying attention to the fact that she was a married woman. This was in principle unacceptable. So she decided to reach out to her husband and said that she was very tired. After that, she asked him to come back and called him darling. The husband was surprised. She hadn't called him that for a long time. And the second prince looked at them with interest. There was something dissolute and evil in his eyes. So Bianca decided to simply turn away and hide in her husband's chest. He asked the prince for forgiveness and said that they needed to leave. He added that his wife was very tired after the long journey, so they would go. Looking at them, the prince only grinned. After that, he said that he had no objection. Count Arno thanked him politely. After that, he helped his wife turn around and headed towards the restrooms. However, the prince continued to look in their direction for a long time. Her husband noticed that she could call him dear in such situations. She noticed that he became sharper with his tongue. The Count remarked that no matter the circumstances, she should not visit the prince's second son, even if he was not around. She replied that he should not worry. She was the daughter of Count Blanchefort and the wife of Arno, who had married to help the first prince. But she remembered that she had briefly thought about supporting the second prince, and the Count had said that he was just worried. He added that the second prince was a very cunning man. The Count did not know what he had in mind, but he really hoped that she would not come near him. Bianca remembered how many scandals there had been around the second prince, and it was hard to disagree with that. The biggest scandal arose from his secret collusion with Aragon, an enemy country, in a war that lasted 20 years. The truth that the Argon invasion was a staged act orchestrated by Jacob only emerged after the second prince had completely destroyed Sevran's sovereignty. He became king and married the Princess of Aragon to strengthen the alliance with that country. This has become an important element of domestic policy. However, Bianca was in the monastery at the time and overheard a conversation between two girls. They talked about a woman who cheated on her husband. Because of her husband's busy schedule, she was unable to cope with loneliness. The busier a man is, the more modest a wife should be and protect her body and mind. However, it turned out to be untrue, and Bianca thought that it was about her. But then they talked about Jacob's wife, the Princess of Aragon, who shared her loneliness with the guard, like Bianca. Bianca then fell in love with Fernand, and the Princess of Aragon betrayed the country by betraying her husband. Aragon was forced to answer every demand of Jacob, and in the end, the entire country had to be handed over. When Fernand was leaving Bianca, a memorable conversation took place. At that moment, when she tried to reach out to him, he said it was time to end it. He had no need to be with her anymore. She asked again, so it was not love but need. He replied that it was necessary, but after her husband's death, Fernand simply abandoned her. She was left alone. Arno was the birthplace of Zachary, which was in the hands of Viscount Hugo. Bianca wondered if anyone had ever insulted Fernand or the guard, but she and the Princess of Aragon had even lost their names. At that moment, Bianca felt her husband press her to him. He said that he called her, but she did not answer because she was thinking about the past. Then she realized that she couldn't tell him about it and said that she was thinking about his clothes, and it was good that she decided to sort them out after all. She suddenly added that her husband was taller and more handsome than the second prince. It hurt her to think that someone was treating him arrogantly and that he was hiding himself in vain behind bad clothes. He just smirked in response. After that, he said that people always tell him that he is tall, but this is the first time he has heard that about his appearance. Bianca looked at him and said that the women he knew must have just been embarrassed or had something wrong with their eyes. The Count wanted to remain silent, but still asked why she was talking about women who did not exist. Bianca told him not to worry. She was not a child, and if there really was a woman he was hiding, she would have noticed. To forget about the meeting with the second prince, the couple began to talk about the past. They shared stories from their lives that warmed their hearts. At that moment, they didn't even suspect that the second prince's fight against Arno had already begun. Unfortunately, whoever was in power was stronger. However, they simply walked to the chambers assigned to them. Ivan opened the doors happily to welcome them. They have almost everything prepared so that they can relax. Bianca noticed that not only was the view from the window picturesque, but the interior was also beautiful. Ivan noticed that everything here was of the highest quality, and Bianca realized that the chest was definitely from Arno. She was about to lose touch with reality, but he brought her back to her senses. Here, Ivan showed the room that would be her bedroom with the Count. Bianca looked at the large bed in bewilderment. She didn't know what to think, since they had never shared a bed together. The Countess asked Ivan if the Count would really stay in the same room with her. Ivan replied that he had not offered any other options for taking the place looking at the bed. Bianca thought that they had become closer lately. But are they really ready for such closeness? However, she remembered her goal. She needed to spend the night with the Count in order to give birth to an heir as soon as possible. Sitting in the room and combing her hair, she began to think. She thought the first night would be at Arno's castle. She was surprised that they would sleep together, and she was very worried. Then the Count entered the room and her heart fluttered. He took a bath, and she saw him like this for the first time. He was not in full dress and was heading towards her. Coming closer, he sat down on the bed next to her, and she wondered what to do. They had already ridden together in a carriage, but the atmosphere was completely different then. He touched her hair and her heart fluttered. She didn't know where to put her hands, and when he touched her, she felt that his hand was very cold. Then the long-awaited kiss happened, or at least it was supposed to happen. She heard her name being called. Once again, she was too carried away by her dreams. At this moment, the Count looked into the room and noted that there was a canopy over the bed above, probably because the castle was not on a high hill, and expressed the hope that it would be warm at night. After that, he asked what happened to her. She had such a look on her face that he assumed she might have a fever or be tired. Bianca couldn't say she had imagined their failed kiss. She tried to hide her feelings from her husband, explaining that she felt fine, and asked him whether he wanted to sleep on the right or left side of the bed. Then, trying to overcome her own embarrassment, she said that, of course, if they sleep together. The husband thought about it and was surprised by this question. He then suggested that it would be best to sleep in the next room. Bianca didn't notice that there was a door leading to another room. However, unable to hide her disappointment, she said that this was true and she was not surprised. Then she tried to fake a smile and added that it was okay, she was just fantasizing about what could have been. Then she said that she was a little tired of her wild imagination and wondered why he didn't just leave. A man with great sensitivity suddenly stayed. He settled down next to her on the bed, his face darker than usual. He noted that she usually sat on the left side and said he would choose the right. Then he said that one day they would share a bed. Bianca was embarrassed and called him my Count. She moved closer and said she couldn't tell if he was teasing her or not, and he leaned back slightly, saying, "Who knows?" Then he added that it seems that everything is gradually changing for the better, for the good. Bianca looked at him with confusion and hope. They needed to return to the conversation they had started on the road about meeting her father, Count Blanchefort. He asked her what she thought about it. That day she was in shock, almost fell off her feet and didn't know what to do. He said that if she doesn't want to, he will meet with him himself. Bianca clasped her hands and said that they were already in the capital anyway, and such a conversation was inevitable. The sooner it happens, the better, she added, which is fine. The night came, filled with anticipation. Yvonne combed her mistress's hair before going to bed. She did her best to prepare her for the night. At that moment, Bianca was thinking about the upcoming meeting with her father and brother, about preparing new clothes, since she belonged to a count's family and not to a baron's, as at the time of the wedding, and had to correspond to her status. She knew that this would not affect her brother and father's opinion of the Count, but meeting them in everyday clothes was unacceptable. She needed to show in any way that she was living better than before and than most others. Yvonne silently joined in and supported the lady, realizing that she had a lot to think about. At this, Yvonne assured that the lady should not worry, as in the morning she would go in search of the most famous seamstress in the capital. The lady supported this idea and thanked the maid. In general, the Countess was never talkative, but at this moment she was very worried about meeting her family, and she kept up the conversation until she went to bed. 9 years passed, and the Countess became a caring and mature woman. However, when it came to the Blanchefort family, she remained the same innocent girl. Morning came, and nothing unexpected happened during the night. If it weren't for the excitement of meeting her family, Bianca would have been worried about not being able to persuade her husband to share her bed. However, at this moment, important events were unfolding in another part of the city. Early in the morning, an envoy from Arnaud hurried to the Blanchefort residence in the center of l'Oise. He delivered the letter from the Count while Bianca's father was drinking tea. The Count heard hurried steps, which excited him. The son burst into the room, asked if his father had slept well, and reported that he had heard the butler talking about receiving a reply from Arnaud. However, the letter was still unopened. The son noted that they had arrived in Laos yesterday, which might be why the letter was delayed, but the Count remarked that if it had been sent before leaving Arnaud, it would have arrived by now. His son said that was even better, and the Count, after reading the letter, said that the meeting with Bianca would take place in 2 days. At that moment, the butler entered and apologized for the disturbance. He reported that a guest had appeared in the reception room. The father was surprised who could come at such an early hour. On the table stood a framed photograph of his daughter in a wedding dress. The second prince of the country, Jacob, looked at this picture. He also saw portraits of the Count, his wife and daughter. Later, he noticed the paintings created after the Countess's death, but the photograph of his daughter attracted him most of all. He was thinking about his plans, and he chose the right words, and he only pretended to stand and study these images. Entering the hall, Count Blanchefort greeted the prince. He understood that this meeting did not bode well. Nevertheless, Prince Jacob greeted the Count joyfully, stating that he had decided to stop by during his walk because he happened to be nearby. Despite the Count's stern face, he began to say that he was sorry he could not give him flowers from his brother's wife or from Audrey's garden. After all, everyone knows that they don't have that kind of relationship, he noted. In addition, he forbade him to approach the garden, although his wife seemed not to mind. Here he hesitated, and he said that he was even embarrassed to talk about it, because what would his older brother feel when he saw her blushing embarrassedly in front of him? After this, he stated without harsh words that he could understand her, because he was much more handsome than his brother. However, he noted that he was uncomfortable with these hidden humiliations. The Count decided to interrupt him and asked what had happened. The prince replied that the king was probably going to invite them to an audience in Audrey's garden, and that the reason for this was the relationship between the Arnauds. Of all the invitees, the second prince would be the one who would most like to meet them. But he learned that the king had excluded him from the guest list, and Jacob wondered if someone was trying to prevent his meeting with Count and Countess Arnaud. Earlier, there was a conversation between the first prince and Count Blanchefort. He said that he had invited the Count to an audience in Audrey's garden at his request, noting that he had not asked why he had decided so. Afterwards, he suggested that it was connected with the second prince, and received an affirmative answer that for some reason he was excessively interested in the daughter of Count Blanchefort and his son-in-law. Therefore, the Count decided that, despite the fact that they would meet sooner or later, it would be better to postpone this meeting until as late as possible. The prince noticed this, and Count Blanchefort thought that he would understand anyway. The second prince continued and said that he would never have thought that His Majesty would attend an audience in the garden to which Jacob was not invited. So much time passed, but the king's viceroy still hadn't arrived, and he still hadn't been able to see his brother. For 2 years, the family tried to restrict his activities. Having shredded the rose he was fiddling with in his hand, the prince declared that he would like to leave the city, relax, and have a drink. However, if he leaves, he will definitely not cross paths with the Arnauds. The Count lowered his eyes, because that was exactly what he wanted. The prince continued his speech and said that he did not know who was making fun of him. As he plucked the last rose petal, he added that the man walking against him had missed one important thing. He looked deeply into the Count's eyes and then continued. The second prince said that in Laos he had eyes and ears everywhere. After throwing away the remains of the flower, he noted that not only in Lawaz, but throughout the country as a whole, and in many other places, perhaps even on the entire continent, he could see and hear everything. After this, he stated that he was tired of being ignored. The Count held the bouquet and did not know how to react. The second prince had become much more cunning and terrifying than he had imagined. However, the guest continued and noted that he had previously repeated after his brother out of envy. The second son of Viscount Vague, who quickly gained popularity, Zachary de Arnaud, interested him. However, after receiving the status, he changed his status, and then the second prince missed his chance to get closer to him. But this time he definitely won't let it go. The prince came close to the Count and looked him intently in the eyes again. After this, he declared that he was planning to get closer not only to the Count, but also to his pretty wife. Then he turned and said that it was time for him to go, wishing the Count a good day. He said everything he wanted. His visit was unfriendly and merely intimidating in nature. At that moment, the son approached his father and asked if the second prince had guessed, but his father replied that he had only voiced what he wanted, and most likely he already knew. He was influenced by his mother and inherited her qualities, which cannot be said about his brothers and sisters. The son asked if they were talking about the first queen, and the Count replied that it was the second queen, her relative. She was ready to do anything to get what she wanted. Blind love made her climb into His Majesty's bed when he was drunk and become pregnant. This child was the second prince, Jacob. This happened when the first queen gave birth to the first prince, Gautier. The second queen was her relative and close friend. The son remarked that it all sounded like the plot of a cheap novel, and the father replied that it all happened unexpectedly, and in general, everyone knows about it. This incident almost destroyed His Majesty's marriage to the Queen. However, the king soon married the second queen to a viscount and tried to improve relations with his first wife. It wasn't easy for him, but he loved her. As a result of the king's efforts, Princess Audrey was born. That is why the king especially protected his daughter. Unfortunately, the queen died of puerperal fever. Thus, the king lost his beloved woman but gained a daughter. After this, the second queen divorced the viscount and returned to the palace with Jacob. She eventually got a place next to the king, but could not take a place in his heart. When she realized that she would not be able to become a queen in his eyes, the only one who did not turn away from her was her son. Only he believed in her and supported her all the time. And this continued despite the fact that the majority of the population supported the first son and his father. Thanks to cunning, Jacob managed to become a prince, despite the fact that he grew up out of wedlock. He has experienced many ups and downs. The prince is very similar to his mother. He holds a deep grudge against the empire and the family that did not love him. He gave the Count no peace even while he was in the carriage. The second prince's interlocutor said that he looked pleased. Jacob replied that he had obtained something. Although there was not a single photograph of the grown-up countess in the house, he had her portrait. It was a shame. He was hoping to find a picture of her a little older. According to his interlocutor, Blanchefort and Arnaud did not exchange personal letters. They were not that close, so the prince ordered that weak points in the families be sought. In addition, it was necessary to find ways to break off their relationship, for which he promised the lands of not only his interlocutor's brother, but also his parents. The interlocutor turned out to be the current Viscount Vague, the brother of Count Arnaud. Bianca ran as fast as she could. Her shadow followed her anxiously. She screamed and cried, calling for her dad. When she reached him, she screamed that Ginny was dead. She was left alone in this huge castle and wanted to return home to Blanchefort. Her father turned around and, calling her by name, said that hadn't he told her not to return to Blanchefort and that anything could happen. Even if she and her brother die, she cannot return. Bianca looked at her father in confusion, unable to hold back her tears. The father added that she was not allowed to come here, even if her husband Zachary did not either. Even when he is pierced by the enemy's arrows, she will not be able to return to Blanchefort. Her heart was breaking, but some bright spots appeared. She heard a voice calling her. Bianca opened her eyes and asked where she was. Her husband leaned over to her and said that they were in the capital, in the castle of Laos. He was worried because her fever had gotten worse since the previous day, and the long carriage ride seemed to have tired her out a lot. Bianca remembered that she was indeed in Laos and asked Yvonne to find a first-class seamstress. Touching her tenderly, the Count advised her to first have a good rest, and when she felt better, the servants would prepare a dress and outerwear for her. Bianca said that it was not she who needed the clothes, but he. He was surprised and asked why she was worried about his clothes when she was in such a state. He placed his hand on her forehead, trying to ease the pain. Then he asked for forgiveness and added that he knew her so little. The Count was worried about his sick wife because he understood that the issue was far from just about clothes. But he still didn't understand why his wife was so afraid of meeting her family. Since last winter, they have started spending much more time together, but it is impossible to make up for 9 years of estrangement in a couple of months. The Count regretted that he had been so cold to Bianca in the past. When she said that now she would hide them and everything would become unnoticeable. The Count asked anxiously if everything was okay, as she still had a temperature and could postpone the meeting with her family until she had had a good rest. He noted that the engagement event was coming up very soon, and everyone would be busy, so there was no need to worry. She told him he shouldn't worry about her, but he noticed that her face was very pale. Bianca turned to the maid and asked her to add some blush to her cheeks. The Count extended his hand and said that he would do it himself. He smeared rouge on her skin, trying to pick up as much color as possible. After that, he stroked Bianca's face and asked if he was doing the right thing. It was a very sweet scene, but Bianca felt strange. The Count said that he had already told her this, but he wanted to repeat that she was not obliged to do what she did not want. He gently stroked her cheek, but she said that nothing would change if nothing was done. Then she assured him again that everything was fine. She was just a little worried that his father might see his clothes and think that his wife was making fun of him. The Count told her not to worry. He would take care of everything. However, Bianca noted that she would still have to mock him, because his efforts with blush made her look even more sick. Indeed, the result was funny, but it somehow relieved the tension a little. The Count apologized and said that he apparently didn't have the necessary skills, and Yvonne could barely contain her smile. He offered his wife a mirror and said that she looked quite pretty. Nevertheless, the maid touched up her makeup a little. This amused Bianca a little, but in the living room her legs began to shake again. Already ready to go out, she began to lose her composure. The Count thought that she was behaving the same way as before meeting the king. However, this was her family, and it shouldn't have been this way. He wondered if maybe he should worry too. Then he imagined how he would act if he met his family, especially his brother who had thrown him out. He would probably be as nervous as Bianca. He pulled his wife towards him and said it was time to go. Bianca almost lost her breath when she saw her father and brother in the living room. But I saw a slightly older father and a completely grown-up son. The look on her father's face, which looked shocked, told her a lot. He addressed her with the words, "darling," saying that she was very similar to her mother. The brother's chin trembled. He couldn't believe that she was already so grown up. The father remarked out loud that she was an exact copy of her mother, just as he had imagined. Bianca thought he looked a little older than she remembered, but that didn't change anything. However, her confusion gradually passed. When her father approached, she instinctively pressed herself against her husband, feeling a little more confident. She wasn't ready for a tight hug, although she wasn't destined for one. Father extended his hand and said that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Then he added, albeit late, "But congratulations on your victory, Count Arno." He was not addressing Bianca herself, but her husband. His opinion was more important to him. Then Bianca realized that all was lost. Doesn't he even bother to ask how she's doing, since it's been 10 years since they last saw each other? Count Arno removed his hand from Bianca's shoulder. He hadn't expected such a reaction either, but he still needed to shake her hand. He thanked Count Blanchefort and added "Sir," but the latter remarked that if they were not on the same level, he could be addressed without formalities. After that, he said that he heard that His Majesty invited him to Princess Audrey's garden, which means the king values him very much. After this, he expressed on the clothes that Count Arno would continue to work in the name of Sevran, and Bianca could barely hold back her tears, clenching her fingers. She understood that he was not here for her, but for a meeting with Count Arno, and there really was no need to be interested in the safety of his daughter, whom he himself had sold. He only wanted to meet to strengthen political ties. Then she couldn't stand it and said that perhaps she didn't need to be here. Count Blanchefort looked at her in surprise. She, trying to hide her resentment, said that it was obvious that he was not interested in how she was doing. How is she living in marriage? How much has she grown? What was it like for her when her nanny Jenny died? Because he doesn't care. And already ready to start screaming, Bianca asked if he even remembered that she was once his daughter.